Chapter 1. The echoing armchair have long prided myself in accompanying Hercule Poirot to the most curious of affairs. But never have I witnessed so startling an entrance to a case that which unfolded on the evening of April 12th at Belgrave Manor. It was a crisp spring night, the kind in which every note of laughter and footstep seems to carry further on the still air an atmosphere perfectly suited to the drama that awaited us. Lady Beatrice Belgrave had sent her invitation by wire a fortnight earlier. Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings, your presence most urgently required at Belgrave Manor, 7 p.m. sharp, Saturday, April 12th. The tone was grave, almost pleading, so we made our way through the manicured lanes of Wiltshire until the manor's great portico loomed before us. Lights gleaming behind mullioned windows like watchful eyes. Inside, the grand hall was alive with society's finest. Colonel Arthur Chamberlain, resplendent in evening dress and white whiskers. Miss Eloise Huntsbury, whose violet gown caught every candle's glow. Mr. Edward Crane, the financier with a reputation for both generosity and shrewdness. Conversation drifted politics. The latest London theatres, yet beneath it all lay a tension we could not quite name. Hastings, Poirot murmured as we stepped into the crowd. Observe how Lady Belgrave's guests deferred to her, yet glance at one another with, what shall we say, apprehension. Something weighs upon their minds. Before I could reply, Lady Belgrave herself appeared at the top of the staircase, her silk skirt whispering against the stone. Her face was drawn, lips pale. She raised a trembling hand for silence, and all fell mute. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice cracking with emotion, we are in terrible peril. Someone, has happened in the library. A murmur swept through the assembled guests. The library lay at the far end of a corridor, its double doors usually locked until morning. That they stood ajar now was in itself alarming. Poirot's little moustaches twitched with interest. Lead the way, madam. We followed Lady Belgrave through vestibule hung with ancestral portraits, each sombre gaze seeming to forewarn of tragedy. As we reached the library doors, a curious sound met our ears, a hollow, rhythmic tapping. The echo came not from within, but from the armchair placed by the fireplace, a deep, mournful thump that suggested something immobile yet insistent. Colonel Chamberlain, braver than most, ventured inside first. I trailed behind Poirot, who paused just within the threshold to survey the scene with cool detachment. The library was bathed in the wavering light of a single table lamp. Bookshelves lined the walls, their volumes casting long shadows. In the center, positioned with deliberate symmetry, stood a richly upholstered armchair, a high back carved with oak leaves. And seated in that chair was the unfortunate Mr. Gerald Langford, his body slumped forward, head resting against the armrest. The sound we heard emanating from his chest, each heartbeat echoed like a slow drumbeat through the hush of the room. Poirot knelt beside the body, his eyes narrowing. Notice, Hastings, the way the chair tilts slightly to the left, as though the late Mr. Langford collapsed against it with some force. I leaned in closer. The lamp's light revealed a thin spray of blood at the base of Langford's temple, staining the upholstery. His hand, resting limply on the arm, held a single envelope, sealed and addressed in Lady Belgrave's flowing script. Lady Belgrave came forward, her hand over her mouth. He never meant to open it. She whispered, it arrived this afternoon just after tea. He said he would read it in private. Poirot rose and gestured to the guests still lingering in the doorway. Please stand back. His voice was calm but insistent. No one must leave this house until I have questioned every one of you. A hush fell. Colonel Chamberlain stood bolt upright. My dear fellow, are you suggesting one of us is responsible? Poirot smiled thinly. That, monsieur, is precisely what I suggest. Although it is far too soon to name a culprit, The circumstances, however extraordinary, will reveal their secrets if we but apply our little grey cells. I confiscated the envelope from Langford's hand, its wax seal unbroken, the paper pristine. Inside, I found a single sheet bearing the legend, "Read only in the presence of Monsieur Porret." It bore no signature. "How curious," Porret murmured, unfolding the letter with meticulous care. He glanced up, his gaze passing over each face in turn. "Gentlefolk, this letter gives the final clue to Mr. Langford's fatal decision. The question is, who sent it and why did it kill him?" Miss Huntsberry shivered. "My cousin was in good health. He spoke of nothing particular, only common affairs of business and family, and yet—" Porret observed. His hand gripped this envelope as though it contained poison itself. He examined Langford's temples. The wound is small but precise. No sign of struggle. No footprints on the carpet. It appears he received a blow. Or perhaps fell backward with such violence that the chair's edge struck him. But that— Tapping, listen. Again, sure enough, the armchair thumped once more, as though compelled by the absent hand upon it. I felt a chill. The manor's silence seemed to press in on us. "Porret," I said softly, "do you think the chair itself is the instrument?" He considered the pattern of blood upon the wood, the slight indentation of Langford's brow against the upholstery. Perhaps not. An inanimate object cannot strike. Yet it may have hidden a mechanism await, a spring, or it may be a clever distraction from the true cause. Lady Belgrave moaned. He was reading his letter. I found him thus, and the letter. Porret held it aloft. "It might be the key. I ask that no one touch it until I have studied its contents more closely." He motioned to us to retire to the hall. As we left, the guests exchanged anxious glances. None dared speak. Colonel Chamberlain muttered darkly about foul play. Miss Huntsberry dabbed at her eyes. Mr. Crane continued to stare at the door through which he had entered, as if already planning his escape. Once outside, Porret placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Mon ami, we have before us not one crime, but perhaps several layers of deception. A private letter that kills, an armchair that echoes, a closed room, and a gathering of souls with motives aplenty. It is the perfect stage for the little grey cells to dance." I dared a question. "But what of the tapping? Surely the sound is real." Hastings," he smiled. "We must always guard against the testimony of the senses, for they may be led astray by artful misdirection. Now, come, let us secure the manor, every room, every guest. This night, the truth will speak at last one, way or another." And so, under the watchful eyes of ancestral portraits and amid the echo of that sinister armchair, our investigation began. Chapter 2. The first clue sealer the following morning. Before the manor stirred to life, Hercule Poirot summoned me to the library once more. The corridors of Belgrave Manor were hushed beneath a grey dawn, and the tap of our boots against the rug echoed as though the house itself listened, through stained glass windows. Pale light fell in faint patterns across the shelves, illuminating. Motes of dust dancing in the still air. Porret moved directly to the armchair, scrutinizing it with the intensity of a sculptor studying marble. The tapping had ceased, yet his little mustaches twitched at angles I had never seen before. He ran a gloved fingertip along the carved oak arm, paused, and then pressed gently into the upholstery. "Hastings, observe the slight give here," he said. He drew back a small section of fabric to reveal a slender metal pin embedded in the wood, a hidden spring mechanism. Perhaps one might rig such a device to deliver a sharp blow or produce a distracting sound, though its exact function eludes me at present. I knelt beside him, examining the pin. So someone constructed the chair to harm Mr. Langford? Possibly. Porret replied, but there may be more subtlety than outright violence. The mechanism might have been intended merely to startle, or to suggest a supernatural element, something to unnerve the victim before the true blow was struck. He rose and beckoned me toward the fireplace, where a scattering of footprints marked the polished hearthstone. Notice Hastings. These prints are in size quite small, suggesting slippers or soft-soled shoes, and they come from the hearth itself, as if the assailant stood close to the fire before retiring discreetly to the shadows. I followed his gaze to a faint smudge on the marble, a dark residue, as though someone had propped a finger against the mantel. Porritt lowered himself to inspect it, then sniffed delicately. Cigar ash, but not any ordinary brand. The smells of St. Claude, no. An expensive Havana blend favoured by a certain financier among our suspects. My mind turned to Mr. Edward Crane. He had arrived dressed impeccably, and I recalled noticing the faintest whiff of smoke about his person. Porritt pocketed a small piece of ash for later analysis. Next, he said, rising, the envelope. He retrieved Langford's letter from the evidence box. The seal had been broken during our initial inspection, but the paper remained pristine. It commands reading in my presence alone, but why? The instruction hints at both fear and curiosity. He unfolded the letter again under the soft morning light, and I saw his eyes flicker as he read. At length, he refolded the paper and inspected its back. In the margin, almost imperceptible, were indentations. One might imagine a note jotted hastily on the next page that left its impression beneath. Here, he murmured, pressing a lens to the margin. A name scratched faintly. F. Belgrave. But Lady Beatrice did not sign any correspondence, and her handwriting differs entirely. Someone has sought to frame her, or perhaps someone else entirely sharing her initials. I felt a chill. The implication was plain. Either an insider wrote it to implicate the lady of the house, or an outsider, with access to both stationery and the library, intended deeper deception. Porritt gently placed the sheet into an evidence envelope. Now, Hastings, let us consider the timeline. He produced a small notebook and pencil. Lady Belgrave dined with her guests at precisely 7 o'clock. The murder occurred, we estimate, shortly after 8, between dinner and the discovery. The victim vanished from company for no more than 20 minutes. He sketched a rough outline of the manor's ground floor, marking the dining room, corridor, vestibule, and library. In that interlude, someone must have escorted Mr. Langford. Door coerced him into the library. The door was found open, but no cloak or hat lay about. Our suspect knew the regular routine, for the staff would not expect visitors to the library after hours, only family and close confidants have keys. I recalled that only Lady Belgrave, Colonel Chamberlain, and Mr. Crane had keys to that suite. Yet the foot traffic near the hearth suggested additional presence. A slippered intruder, perhaps a woman. Though one could not be certain. Porritt tapped the sketch. Observe, Hastings, the path taken seems to avoid the main corridor lamps. A clever ruse to minimize detection. The corridor outside the library smelled faintly of laudanum. A sedative odor that lingers long after a drop has been administered. He sniffed the air near the doorway. Remarkable. Our murderer prepared the victim, passively administering something to dull the senses before the mechanical blow, or even to mask the sound of the mechanism. My stomach tightened. The crime grew ever more elaborate. Spring-loaded pin, misleading tapping, sedative fumes. Porritt stepped back, smoothing his mustaches. Let us not overlook the letter. Hastings. Its summons to be read only by me implies that Langford feared someone so deeply he would not trust anyone but him. Why discretion? Who among our circle strikes one with such dread? I thought of Miss Huntsberry and the whispered family secrets that had wafted through dinner. She had seemed anxious, glancing again and again at Lady Belgrave when the subject drifted to inheritances. Could she harbour resentment so potent it might kill? Poirot pocketed his notebook. We shall question each suspect once more, but first I wish to examine the dining room. Something tells me that an item left behind there will complete the puzzle. We crossed the hall to the grand dining room, which still bore remnants of last night's repast. Candlesticks guttering low, silver plates stacked neatly at one side, half-empty wine glasses shimmering in the morning gloom. On the sideboard lay a decanter of sherry. Its stopper removed, Poirot approached and lifted the stopper. Note again the faint aroma of laudanum. Someone spiked the victim's wine during dinner. But Mr. Langford must have poured himself a separate glass in the library, unobserved. He turned to the table's edge, and here a small fleck of grey cloth caught against the damask. He gently extracted it with tweezers, a fragment of genteel tweed. The colonel's jacket was of a darker grey. Heavier fabric, he observed. This is lighter perhaps from one of the ladies' jackets, or even your own, Hastings. But such fragments rarely drift so precisely unless placed deliberately. I examined the fragment, perplexed. So the poison or sedative entered his system long before he ever reached the library. Precisely. Poirot nodded. He fell into a drowsy reverie, guided to the chair by our murderer, then delivered the mechanical blow to ensure his demise. But why all this theatre the tapping? The envelope, the staged collapse. He paused and looked at me with those piercing eyes. Misdirection, monomy. A clever offender delights in elaborate ruses to confuse the mind. Our task is to sift truth from artifice. A sudden, soft sound from behind startled us. We turned to see Lady Belgrave standing in the doorway, her eyes red but determined. Monsieur Poirot, I wish to speak with you and to answer any questions you might have. Poirot inclined his head. Madame, your courage is admirable. Pray, step inside. She closed the door and moved next to the sideboard, wiping her trembling hands on a handkerchief. I have told the staff to await your questions. I cannot rest knowing that the murderer may walk these halls freely. Poirot cast a glance at the decanter and the fragment of cloth. Madam, have you any idea who might wish harm to your cousin, Mr. Langford? She hesitated, then forced a pale smile. None that I can believe. Gerald was well liked, if somewhat reserved. But last winter he changed. He spoke to me of threats, anonymous letters warning him to leave certain affairs alone. She shivered. He would not say more. At this, Poirot exchanged a look with me. Another layer of mystery. What affairs inflamed such fear? Was it business, romance, or something darker? And who knew of these warnings besides them, as Lady Belgrave began to explain further? I realized with a start that the first clue's footprints, sedative Roma, cloth fragment. Scratched initials had already woven a web to tangle for the untrained mind. But under Poirot's gaze, each thread gleamed with purpose. The morning light deepened, and with it came the certainty that the truth would soon emerge. Yet, as our questions multiplied, so, too, did the shadows they cast. Chapter 3, The Gathering. Of suspects be midday. Belgrave Manor had settled into an uneasy stillness. Servants flitted through the corridors on silent errands, while guests waited in the drawing-room under Lady Beatrice's strict order not to wander alone. I found Hercule Poirot reclining in a wing-back chair, his eyes alight with anticipation as he reviewed his notes. Mon ami, he said, smoothing his moustaches, now is the time to bring every soul before us. Each will reveal a thread of the tapestry, whether knowingly or not, leaving the drawing-room door ajar. Poirot summoned the first guest, Colonel Arthur Chamberlain. The colonel entered with an air of military precision, his chest thrust forward and his gait measured. Colonel, Poirot greeted, rising politely. Thank you for your cooperation. Pray, sit." He motioned to a chair opposite him. The colonel obeyed, setting his jaw firmly. "You were present at dinner last night." Porritt began, "and you possessed a key to the library. How often do you use it, sir?" The colonel sat straighter. "Hardly ever, monsieur. The library was not my haunt. I prefer the billiard room." Gerald Langford and I exchanged pleasantries, but he excused himself early, saying he had letters to attend to. Porritt inclined his head. "Indeed. Did you notice anyone follow him?" Colonel Chamberlain frowned. "No one that I saw, but I did overhear him speak in low tones with Miss Huntsbury, I believe." "Miss Eloise Huntsbury," Porritt confirmed. "And what of your relationship with her, Colonel?" The colonel flushed. "Merely acquaintances. We served together once, in India, that is all." Porritt nodded, his gaze steady. "Very well, Colonel. I thank you." With a polite bow, the colonel withdrew. Next came Miss Eloise Huntsbury, her violet gown subdued now by morning light. She perched on the edge of a chaise longue, her hands clasped tightly. "Miss Huntsbury," Porritt said softly, "you and Mr. Langford shared a brief discussion before he departed for the library. May I know its subject?" Eloise's eyes flickered. He asked about my family's finances. He feared my brother had borrowed too heavily against her estate. I assured him I would handle matters, but he was anxious. "And did he mention any ill will toward another guest?" Porritt pressed. She hesitated. "He spoke of a business dispute with Mr. Crane, I think. He said Edward Crane had recently lost a considerable sum in one of his ventures." She paused. Gerald thought Crane might hold a grudge. Porritt made a small note. "Curious. And did you see Mr. Crane that evening?" She nodded. "He lingered at the far end of the table, nursing a glass of sherry. He watched Gerald leave, but I cannot say if he followed." Porritt's eyes narrowed. "Thank you, Miss Huntsbury." She left with a polite curtsy. Sir Rupert Fairchild, a dignified gentleman from London's legal circles, was summoned next. He approached with measured steps, his dark hair threaded with silver. "Sir Rupert," Porritt began, "you advised Mr. Langford on a will drafted just last month. Can you recall his sentiments about it?" Sir Rupert smoothed his tie. "He was conflicted, monsieur. He believed his cousin, Lady Belgrave, had exerted undue influence. He wished to remove her as principal beneficiary. But I advised caution. Family discord can be most unpleasant. And did he share this intention with anyone else?" Porritt asked. The lawyer considered. "Only with me and perhaps his solicitor. He did not trust many with such sensitive information." Porritt tapped his pencil. "That is helpful. Thank you, Sir Rupert." As Sir Rupert departed, Porritt whispered, "A motive of inheritance, an attempted disenfranchisement. Every avenue leads back to Belgrave." But one by one, guests filed in. Mr. Edward Crane, his tailored coat crisp, his gaze guarded. Mrs. Henrietta Belmont, a distant cousin with silken gloves and a watchful eye, even the manor's solicitor. Mr. Faulkner, whose ledger-like expression betrayed nothing. When Mr. Crane was at last seated, Porritt leaned forward. "Monsieur Crane, you enjoy a fine Havana cigar, and yet remnants of ash were found near the fireplace. Were you in the library after dinner?" Crane's jaw tightened. "I stepped in to fetch some books from my study. I left immediately, saw nothing amiss." He raised an eyebrow. "And I do not smoke in public rooms. Then how explain the ash?" Porritt asked, lifting the fragment gently. Crane's knuckles whitened as he reached for a handkerchief. Crane exhaled. "Perhaps I passed along. I meant no harm to Langford. I owed him a debt of gratitude. He once funded my venture when banks refused." Porritt allowed a faint smile. "An act of generosity. Not everyone's motive, however. He motioned to the door, and Crane withdrew. With each interview, a pattern emerged, alliances born of gratitude, enmities simmering beneath the polite veneer of high society. Yet no single testimony struck Poirot as definitive. Instead, each revealed a facet of human nature: greed, resentment, loyalty. Fear dotted midday. Poirot dismissed the guests and summoned Lady Belgrave. She entered the drawing-room, pale but resolute. "Madam," Poirot greeted gently, "I wish to ask about your own movements last night. You possess the master key to the library, do you not?" She nodded, her hands trembling. "Yes, I carried it by my watch chain, and you dined until 7:30. Poirot continued. Then, her eyes filled with tears, "I spent an hour in the garden with my husband's portrait. When I returned, Gerald had already gone. I discovered his absence moments before dinner ended." Poirot's gaze lingered. "Were you aware of his plans to alter his will?" She swallowed. "He told me in confidence last week. He wished to cut me out, said he felt I had grown cold compared to former days. I begged him to reconsider, but he was adamant." "Yet you chose to remain here in the drawing-room," Poirot said. "No reason to enter the library." She shook her head. "No reason. Unless I was followed. I felt someone's presence, a draft by the window, but when I turned, no one was there." Poirot's eyes glittered. "A phantom, madam, or a witness who fled before you saw?" Before she could answer, a servant announced the arrival of Mr. Faulkner, the solicitor. His ledger-like countenance gave little away as he curtsied. "Monsieur Faulkner," Poirot said briskly, "you drafted a codicil in Mr. Langford's will 2 days ago. The provisions are curious. He removed a bequest to Miss Huntsberry, substituting an equal amount to Colonel Chamberlain. Any explanation?" Faulkner adjusted his spectacles. He claimed a newfound respect for the Colonel's service and felt Eloise unduly influenced by her brother's BTS. He wished to protect her. But, well, monsieur, in legal terms, any sudden amendment is cause for concern. Poirot's lips curved. "Indeed. Thank you, monsieur." As Mr. Faulkner left, Poirot rose and paced. The drawing-room's rich curtains seemed to close in, as though stifling the secrets within. I watched him, wondering which strand of testimony he found most telling. At length he stopped before a tall window overlooking the rose garden. "Hastings, you see the gathering is complete. Each suspect has layers hidden debts, familial duty, resentment, gratitude, yet the true culprit lies hidden beneath them all." I ventured, "Is it the financier, Mr. Crane, driven by shame over debts, or Miss Huntsberry, fearing the loss of her inheritance, or even Lady Belgrave, stung by her cousin's decision?" Poirot shook his head, lifting his hand to a shaft of light. "No, Hastings. They are but puppets on the stage. Our murderer is the playwright, the one who directed each scene with precise intention. And the key to identifying that mind lies not only in what they said, but in what they could not hide." He returned to his chair, his gaze turning inward as though replaying conversations. Outside, a distant clock tolled 1. The hour of reckoning approached. Yet the murder remained among us, their identity obscured by polite words and false alibis. "Gather the staff," Poirot ordered. "We shall examine every key, every lock, every whispered motive. The next hour will bring us closer to the heart of deception." As I hurried away to secure the household staff, I felt the weight of Poirot's confidence in his mind. Each testimony formed a mosaic. I only hoped that, when revealed, the picture would leave no doubt as to the hand that engineered Gerald Langford's death. Chapter 4. Poirot's first impression after noonlight had shifted by the time Poirot summoned us. To the drawing-room, once more, the heavy velvet drapes were drawn partly aside, allowing beams of sun to fall across the patterned carpet like pale pointers guiding our attention. I took my usual seat beside Poirot, who settled into his favourite chaise longue with deliberate elegance. Round us, the suspects paced or sat in stiff silence, awaiting their turn under his piercing scrutiny. Lady Belgrave, still pale from grief, hovered near the fireplace, her lips pressed into a thin line. Colonel Chamberlain stood with arms folded, his uniform immaculate though the creases seemed to cut into the very atmosphere. Miss Huntsbury fluttered by the window, smoothing her skirts and avoiding all eyes. Mr. Crane leaned against a side table, one hand tucked into his coat, the other mindlessly turning a silver pocket watch. Sir Rupert Fairchild scanned documents on the writing desk, while Mr. Faulkner, the solicitor, cleared his throat as though the clearing might suffice for his nerves. Poirot clasped his hands, his little grey cells already in motion. He fixed each person in turn with a glance so unwavering that I sensed he discerned their inner turmoil rather than their outer facades. Msamus, he began in his practised French accent. You have been most obliging in recounting your whereabouts and relationships, yet I find that the explanations offered are, how shall we say, too convenient. It is not sufficient merely to know where one stands. We must ask how one feels to stand there. A hush fell. Lady Belgrave's eyes flickered toward her husband's portrait. Colonel Chamberlain's jaw clenched, and Miss Huntsbury paused mid-step. Poirot continued, gently but firmly. When one truly fears another's company, one notices details that escape polite observation. I have seen these hallmarks in the aftermath of Mr. Langford's demise. He turned to Colonel Chamberlain. Colonel, you maintain you rarely enter the library. Yet upon the hearth I discovered footprints compressed deeply into the hearthrug, far more than one would expect from a man in boots. And the small fleck of tweed fabric suggests a lighter garment, possibly the lining of your own smoking jacket, which you discarded upon arrival. The colonel stiffened. I did remove my jacket in the library when fetching Miss Huntsbury's book. I did not follow Langford in with malicious intent. Poirot inclined his head. But the timing. You claimed you entered the library at precisely 8:05, yet the decanter's stopper on the sideboard had been removed earlier, allowing the laudanum-laced sherry to sit exposed. Whoever poured the drink needed time for the sedative to take effect. If you were first to arrive, you provided that opportunity. Colonel Chamberlain's face darkened. You imply I engineered the entire affair. Not yet, Poirot replied calmly. But one must consider all possibilities. He straightened slightly, then turned to Miss Huntsbury. Miss Huntsbury, you spoke of familial debts and concerns for your brother. Yet I observe your hands bear no sign of recent contact with inks or paper. The indentations on the reading table suggest someone scribbled urgently, then pressed too hard perhaps you, upon learning of your altered inheritance. Eloise's cheeks flushed. I only feared for my family, not for myself. Poirot's moustaches twitched as he nodded. Fear itself can drive one to actions unintentional. But the scratches F. Belgrave on the letter margin these could be your doing, to steer suspicion from actual motives. The absence of any scent of laudanum on your gloves suggests you did not handle the decanter. She bit her lip and stammered something, then backed away, eyes wide. Poirot did not press further. Instead, he addressed Mr. Crane. Monsieur Crane, you profess gratitude to the deceased for financial aid, yet you stand to gain nothing if Colonel Chamberlain is the heir, and yet the ash of St. Clodno, 5 was found upon Mr. Langford's shoulder. Why would you leave such an unusual trace if not to mark your presence? Crane straightened. running a hand through his hair. "I smoked outside. If ash fell inside. It was accidental. I did not intend to harm Gerald. Porritt cocked his head. An accident, perhaps. But the residue upon the mantel matches the brand. You favor. Yes, you could not avoid leaving it were you indeed in that room." Crane glared, but offered no further protest. Porritt leaned back, turning his attention to Sir Rupert. "Sir Rupert, your codicil edits suggest knowledge of both legal procedure and personal relationships, you know. The potential for conflict, when suggesting Colonel Chamberlain as beneficiary instead of Miss Huntsberry. Yet the sedative was not administered in the dining room until after all guests had drunk, but before the servants withdrew. Only someone with access to the kitchen or sideboard could have tampered with the decanter unnoticed. The lawyer sighed. "I admit drafting the codicil, but I did not poison my client. I would have preferred to see the family reconciled, not ripped apart by grief." Porritt tapped his pencil lightly. "Reconciliation through tragedy. How uneven. A proposal, yet your role remains ambiguous, a scribe rather than a culprit, unless you wish to poison reputations as well as persons." Mr. Faulkner straightened. "I object to insinuations without proof." Porritt regarded him coolly. "Proof, monsieur, is what we seek, and proof lies in fact, not sentiment. Allow us to examine the evidence rather than our feelings." He rose slowly and crossed to the library doorway, indicating the mechanism in the armchair. "Observe this pin once more. No common criminal would devise such a contraption unless they valued theatrics." The tapping was a siren's call to divert. Attention! Townsittle Mr. Langford's of that. He would sit and await the final blow. Only a person of subtle mind and dramatic flair, someone accustomed to controlling narratives, would conceive such artistry. A murmur rose among the suspects. Porritt raised his hand. "I have heard your words, I have noted your gestures, and I have perceived your unspoken fears. Now, I shall retire for a short time to range these impressions into a coherent theory. When I return, I will ask only one question that will reveal the perpetrator." With that, he moved to the far window and peered out over the gardens, his profile austere yet alive with concentration. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, each wondering which among them would soon be unmasked. As I sat beside Porritt, I felt the full weight of his anticipation, and I knew that, inside his brilliant mind, the pieces were clicking into place. The masquerade would soon end, and the truth, however shocking, would at last stand revealed. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin this afternoon sun. Slanting through the mullioned windows of Belgrave Manor, cast long shadows across the panelled walls as Hercule Poirot and I commenced our first round of formal interviews. The drawing room had been reconverted into a temporary consultation chamber, heavy curtains drawn to soften the light, a small Lancashire rug to muffle footsteps, and a simple oak table at its centre. Each suspect entered in turn, their expressions guarded yet tinged with apprehension. First to be summoned was Colonel Arthur Chamberlain. He entered briskly, standing rigidly at attention before easing into the chair opposite Porritt. I perched on the edge of a nearby settee, notebook in hand, ready to record the smallest inflection or hesitation. "Colonel," Porritt began, smoothing his moustaches, "you informed us that you escorted Miss Huntsberry's book to her this morning, yet you claimed a natural reluctance to enter the library last night. Pray explain this inconsistency." The Colonel's blue eyes narrowed. "Monsieur Porritt, I merely wished to continue the courtesy offered at dinner. I noticed Miss Huntsberry in some distress when Langford left, so I retrieved a volume of poems from the library, a harmless errand. Nothing more." Porritt inclined his head. "A kind gesture, indeed, but one that afforded you two opportunities. to administer the sedative and to trigger the spring mechanism in the armchair. Forgive my candor, but such a sequence of events seems hardly accidental. Colonel Chamberlain stiffened, his uniform creasing at the elbows. He cleared his throat. I would never harm Gerald. He was a fellow officer once. I respected him. Too much for treachery. Respect alone does not preclude resentment. Porritt countered gently. Your furlough in India was cut short by an incident involving Mr. Langford's family estate and affair. You felt unjust. You once confided in me that you felt betrayed by his decisions regarding your commission. A tense silence followed. The colonel's jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he would break. Then he exhaled slowly. I was angry, true, but that was months ago. By the time of his death, I had come to terms with the past. Porritt studied him, lips pursed. Anger is a fire that can burn long after the embers cool. Thank you, Colonel. You may go. The colonel rose, saluted me with a curt nod, and departed with measured steps. Next, Porritt beckoned Mr. Edward Crane. The financier entered with the air of a wounded animal, his tailored coat straining slightly at the shoulders. He seated himself, glancing at the table as though expecting another trap. Monsieur Crane, Porritt began, you admitted owing your recent enterprise's revival to Mr. Langford's benevolence. Yet your business suffered losses at precisely the same time your debts to him increased. Pray, elucidate this paradox. Crane ran a slender finger along the table's edge. I admit my venture faltered, but Gerald believed in my vision. He lent me the funds to continue. The losses were beyond my control, market fluctuations, unforeseen tariffs. If anything, I owe him more gratitude than I ever repaid. Gratitude or guilt? Porritt asked softly. One might question why a man of your means would accept such terms. Knowing the precarious nature of his affairs, Crane's jaw tightened. If I refused, I risked bankruptcy. He held all the cards. I accepted his generosity with reluctance but appreciation. I scribbled furiously as Porritt leaned forward. Your cigar ash near the fireplace suggests you lingered in the library after dinner. Did you anticipate another meeting with Mr. Langford? Crane's lip curled. I thought perhaps he had unanswered queries about our negotiations, I ventured. In to discuss terms, I found the door ajar. Called his name, no answer, then noticed the body. He paused, swallowing. I left immediately to summon help. I swear, I had no intention beyond the purely professional. Porritt's eyes flicked to mine before returning to Crane. Professional matters can turn personal with little warning. Yet you left no fingerprints on the decanter, no disturbance of the mechanism except that which you claimed to find. It is curious indeed. He sat back, folding his hands. You may step outside. Crane rose, gave a curt nod, and exited without another word. Finally, Porritt directed his attention to Miss Eloise Hunsberry. She entered with cautious grace, smoothing the folds of her gown as though to reassure both herself and the room. She sat demurely, hands folded in her lap. Miss Hunsberry, Porritt said, voice gentle, you expressed worry for your brother's finances, yet your temperament betrayed no sign of death's desperation. Pray, reflect on your emotions when you spoke with Mr. Langford last night. Her lips quivered. I was anxious, yes, but only for my family's welfare. I would never harm Gerald, he was generous. But blunt, I feared his influence might ruin my household. Porritt nodded, then leaned forward, picking up a small silver thimble that had belonged to Lady Belgrave. This item was discovered in the library. Miss, it bears the slightest smudge of perfume. You wore the same scent last evening. How might this thimble have traversed from your person to the scene? Eloise gasped, glancing down at her gloves. I must have dropped it when I entered the library to ask Gerald to quell his suspicions. I recall a faint bump. Perhaps I startled when I saw the door ajar. Poirot allowed the explanation, yet his gaze remained inscrutable, and the indentations on the letter margin, F. Belgrave. You suggested your cousin's hand, but do you recall handling stationery that bore her initials? She swallowed. Gerald often used family stationery. Perhaps I penned a note earlier and the impression came through. She hastily covered her mouth with a gloved hand. I cannot think otherwise. Poirot tapped his pencil. Memory can falter under stress. Thank you. Miss, you may leave. As she rose and swept from the room, Poirot leaned back with his fingertips pressed together. I closed my notebook and observed him closely. Mon ami, he said quietly. You have heard the initial accounts of our principal suspects. Each has motive, opportunity, and a tangle of half-truths, yet the essential detail escapes them all. I ventured, the decanter, the mechanism, or the author of the letter. He smiled slightly. Those are ingredients, but the recipe is incomplete without the cook's signature. Our murderer is not the one who erred in opportunity, but the one who orchestrated every clue to point elsewhere. And I suspect that person relishes the theater of illusion. He drummed his fingers on the table. Now, Hastings, we shall pursue the secondary mystery that unsettles all, the missing will. For I believe a crucial document has vanished one. That will reveal both the murderer's identity and the ultimate motive. Rising, Poirot gathered his notes and gestured for me to follow. The corridor beyond awaited, silent as a tomb. With each step, the intricate puzzle seemed to twist further, yet under Poirot's guiding mind, its solution drew inexorably closer. Chapter 6. The first false lead late in the afternoon. A sharp summons drew Poirot, Hastings, and the household staff into the library once more. Lady Belgrave stood near the doorway, her face pale but determined, while Colonel Chamberlain and Mr. Crane lingered behind her. Exchanged glances heavy with anticipation. Word had spread swiftly through the manor that a pivotal clue had been uncovered, one that would seemingly point unerringly to the murderer. The air was electric with expectation. Yet, under Poirot's calm exterior, I sensed growing caution. Inside the library, the scene was ranged with clinical precision. The armchair stood prominently before the hearth, its hidden mechanism now laid bare and secured in a small box at Poirot's feet. On the table beside it lay the fragile remnants of Mr. Langford's letter, annotated with Poirot's notes and stamped evidence. Beyond these lay a leather portfolio, now unbuckled, its contents spread neatly across the writing desk. The codicil, a series of handwritten notes, and, most restingly, the original signed will of Gerald Langford. Poirot motioned for silence and addressed the gathering. Msamus, until now our inquiry has been guided by fragments, footprints, scents, mechanism, and suggestion. But here, before us, lies what appears to be incontrovertible proof. He swept his arm toward the will. This document, drafted last month and signed by Gerald Langford, designates Colonel Chamberlain as primary heir, with Miss Huntsberry entirely omitted. It contradicts the codicil drafted by Sir Rupert mere days before the murder. Thus, all evidence points toward the Colonel acting out of fear that his inheritance might be revoked. Colonel Chamberlain's face drew tight. Monsieur Poirot, I admit to discussing the will with Sir Rupert, but I did not draft nor possess the original document. I never laid hands upon it. Poirot paused for effect, but the staff found the will in your coat pocket beneath the lining. He glanced toward the butler, whose steady hand held up the Colonel's evening coat. With solemnity, the coat was draped over a chair, its interior exposed. There, sewn into the pocket, was a folded parchment bearing Gerald's signature. A gasp rippled through the assembled guests. Miss Huntsberry covered her mouth, eyes wide. Mr. Crane's hand tightened round his coat lapel. Sir Rupert's composed features cracked with surprise. All eyes turned to Colonel Chamberlain, who stepped back as though struck. He began, voice faltering. "That coat has not left my presence since last evening. I laid it upon the sofa after dinner and collected it this morning. I would never conceal a will. I am a soldier, bound by honor." Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. "Yet the law permits one to possess documents that safeguard one's interests. The discovery here lends credence to the theory that you retrieved the will to prevent late amendments, thus ensuring your succession. When Mr. Langford discovered your actions, you silenced him." A murmur followed. Lady Belgrave pressed a hand to her heart. Colonel Chamberlain's eyes darted round, seeking escape or support. Even the butler, stalwart to duty, seemed to shrink. Under the charge, Poirot fixed the colonel with a gaze both firm and sympathetic. "I understand your predicament, Colonel. A man learns of betrayal and acts in the heat of emotion. Yet we seek truth, not passion. I must ask, did you, in a moment of desperation, deliver the fatal strike?" The colonel's face went ashen. He opened his mouth, then closed it, for a tense heartbeat. He stood silent, will himself to speak or confess. Then, with a sudden gesture, he tore his eyes from Poirot's and strode toward the door. "I will not answer baseless allegations," he declared. "My conscience is clear." He seized his coat from the chair and flung it over his shoulder. Without another word, he withdrew, leaving the library in stunned silence. Poirot let the moment linger before turning to the assembled company. "You see, Zamis, how easily a seemingly decisive clue can implicate an innocent man, or at least one who protests too loudly. Yet justice demands we do not leap to conclusions." Miss Huntsbury, recovering from her shock, stepped forward. "Then it was not Colonel Chamberlain who killed my cousin?" Poirot smiled thinly. "Not necessarily, but the presence of this will in his coat pocket, and indeed the singular flourish of his signature, may have a different explanation. Before we condemn the colonel, we must examine not only how the will arrived there, but why it was placed there. Meanwhile, the coroner's preliminary report is at hand." He turned to the butler, who produced a sealed package of papers. "Allow me to read the findings," drawing back the cover. Poirot's voice unfolded the coroner's observations. "The blow to Mr. Langford's temple was delivered by a blunt object with a rounded edge, likely the handle of a letter opener. The angle of impact suggested the victim was seated upright, as if engaged willingly at a desk. No sign of a fall or defensive wound. Moreover, toxicological analysis of the decanter's contents revealed only trace amounts of laudanum, insufficient to induce full sedation, but enough to dull pain receptors. A second finding caused a stir. The original will bore an adhesive seal of the solicitor's office, not the manor's stationery. Yet the codicil Sir Rupert drafted used the family crest, embossed upon Lady Belgrave's personal paper. Ergo, the instrument found in the colonel's pocket was an authentic document from the solicitor, unlikely to have been pilfered by the colonel alone. Poirot folded the coroner's report and looked up. "Observe how the evidence, when plucked from its context, can mislead even the most careful mind. The will itself is genuine, but someone intended it for Colonel Chamberlain to find in his possession. Why, to direct suspicion toward him and away from the true architect. Sir Rupert, who had remained silent until now, spoke with measured restraint. Monsieur Poirot, if Colonel Chamberlain is innocent, and yet the will was placed on him, then who benefits from such a diversion?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "An excellent question, sir. The diversion serves a dual purpose. It casts blame upon the colonel, and it obscures the timing of the will's transfer. Recall that Mr. Langford instructed none but me to read the envelope he held. Yet the will itself was meant for a different pair of eyes. The forger seeks to manipulate both the document and the audience. Mr. Crane leaned forward. You suggest the murderer is skilled in theatre, someone who understands psychology and appreciates the dramatic effect of a staged discovery. Precisely, Monsieur, Poirot replied. And who among us revels in such spectacle? Who orchestrated the tapping mechanism in the armchair and timed the decanter's dosage? Who composed letters and counter-letters, each designed to heighten suspense? All eyes shifted to Lady Belgrave, whose tremulous composure belied her shock. She swallowed and shook her head. It cannot be me. I found my cousin dead. I have no taste for such machinations. Poirot's gaze softened. Of that, madam, I am certain. But I must ask one more question of each of you. Was there any change to your relationships with Mr. Langford in the days leading to his death in a fresh grievance? Midnight correspondence or financial entanglement? As each suspect hesitated, glancing at one another, Colonel Chamberlain's distant footsteps sounded along the corridor, a reminder that the accused still walked free. The false sled had collapsed like a house of cards, but in its tumbling, it had revealed the murderer's signature, a talent for misdirection and drama. Poirot tucked the coroner's report under his arm. I suggest we retire for a tea. During that interval, I shall reflect upon this staging. When we reconvene, we shall explore the subsidiary mystery of the missing will and, with it, the heart of our killer's design. With that, the guests dispersed, some in relief, others in apprehension, toward the drawing-room. I followed Poirot, whose expression was inscrutable yet resolute. The first false sled had been exposed, but the true path remained shrouded. In Poirot's mind, however, the pieces had begun to align, and soon the real culprit would step into the light of justice. Chapter 7. The psychological Gamma drawing room's atmosphere after tea was thick with languid conversation and tentative glances, yet beneath the polite veneer lay currents of doubt and dread. Hercule Poirot, his little grey cells clearly dancing with anticipation, rose from his seat by the window and signalled for silence. I observed his measured pace as he approached Colonel Chamberlain, who reclined stiffly in a velvet armchair. Brow furrowed. Colonel, Poirot began, voice silkily calm. You spoke to me of your concern at being removed from Mr. Langford's will. Pray tell me, did you ever confess the resentment to anyone else? The colonel's jaw tightened. He inhaled sharply, as if bracing for an unexpected blow. Only to you, Poirot, and once at the club. In the privacy of my club's smoking room. I vented, but it was mere frustration. Poirot inclined his head, allowing the suggestion of knowledge to percolate. The club, a gathering place of confidences, and yet, Colonel, you insisted you had not smoked at home. The ash found near the hearth contradicts that statement. Were you wrong? Or were you, how shall I say, careful in your recollections? Chamberlain opened his mouth, then closed it without a word. His silence spoke volumes. He feared any admission would further implicate him. Poirot's moustaches quivered with satisfaction, and he moved on to Lady Belgrave, whose fingers toyed anxiously with the tea-tray's china handle. Madam, he said softly, you mentioned feeling watched in the garden last evening. If you were uneasy, why did you not ask a servant to accompany you? You are accustomed to authority, to commanding the household. What prevented you from seeking aid? Lady Belgrave's lips quivered as she answered, I fear alarming Gerald. He was already on edge about the letters. I did not want to burden him further. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You value discretion above all. Yet your reticence meant you discovered your cousin only after tragedy. One wonders whether silence can be as deadly as any weapon. She drew in a shaky breath and dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. I merely wished to protect him from scandal. Protection? Poirot mused. can assume many guises. He paused, studying her face for the slightest flicker of deception. Then he addressed Miss Huntsberry, who sat near the hearth, chin in hand and eyes distant. Miss Huntsberry, you declined Colonel Chamberlain's offer to escort you to the library, yet you ventured there alone. Why risk solitude where danger might lurk? Miss Huntsberry's cheeks flushed. I wish only to confront my cousin to beg him to restore my brother's legacy. I thought it a matter of urgency. Urgency indeed, Purrit said. But one might argue that desperation leads to ill-considered actions, you admitted. Too pressing too hard upon the letter's margin, causing the scratch of F. Belgrave, could it be your anger, rather than the murderer's design, that marred the page? She recoiled slightly, voice trembling. I would not harm him, but I confess I pressed my pen over hard in frustration. Purrit gave a subtle nod, filing away the confession. He turned then to Mr. Crane, who leaned against a bookcase, arms folded and gazed steely. Monsieur Crane, Purrit began. You claim to have spoken to Mr. Langford in the library about financial matters, yet the coroner's report indicates the fatal blow came from a rounded instrument, not the letter opener you carry in your case, but the handle of a desk dagger from Lady Belgrave's collection. How did that implement come to be at the scene? Crane's brow furrowed. I have never handled the dagger. It was on display in the study, not the library. But the study and library share a corridor. Purrit replied. One could remove the dagger unseen and return it thereafter. You admitted to pacing outside the library door after dinner, waiting for Mr. Langford. Did you not consider a more persuasive argument than mere words? Crane's jaw clenched. I would not strike him. I only wished to negotiate terms, Purrit tapped his cane lightly on the rug. Negotiation need not be so vigorous. Yet the bruising on Mr. Langford's temple matches the curvature of that dagger handle. Curious coincidence. Or deliberate misdirection. Silence reigned as Crane struggled to find a retort. Purrit allowed the moment to linger before moving to Sir Rupert Fairchild, who folded and unfolded his hands in his lap. Sir Rupert, Purrit said, voice gentle, you drafted the codicil that altered Mr. Langford's will. You are a man of letters, of precise instruction, yet you neglected to note the transition in stationery from solicitors to family crest, thus risking discovery. Did you intend that risk as a clue to someone else's involvement? Sir Rupert's composure faltered, and he tugged at his cuff. I did not think I would be under suspicion. I acted purely upon my client's wishes, purely. Purrit echoed, all precipitously. He leaned closer. Consider this. The codicil served to benefit Colonel Chamberlain and disadvantage Miss Huntsberry. Were you the solitary scribe, or merely the instrument of an unseen hand seeking to manipulate loyalties? Sir Rupert's lips tightened. He looked away, then sighed. I followed instructions. I bear no guilt beyond that. Purrit straightened, turning his gaze to all present. Msamus. You see how easily words can trap the unwary. My questions are but stones thrown into still water. They ripple outward, revealing hidden currents beneath. Yet truth remains elusive until one fish rises to the surface. He paced slowly across the room, gaze sweeping each face. And now, I will pose a final test. His voice dropped. I will recount the night's events from memory, including the smallest details. Those who feel discomfort at my reconstruction may reveal and perhaps unwittingly confess their deeper involvement. He began, articulating in crisp, measured language, the timing of dinner, the removal of the sherry stopper, the odor of laudanum, Langford's departure to the library, the tapping from the armchair, the envelope's injunction, the discovery of the body, the removal and concealment of the will, the coroner's findings on the dagger, the footprints in the ash. As each fact emerged, I saw subtle shifts. Colonel Chamberlain's tightening fists, Lady Belgrave's shuddering breath, Miss Huntsberry's averted gaze, Crane's narrowing eyes, and Sir Rupert's tense throat. When Poirot finished, a brittle silence settled. He turned to Colonel Chamberlain. "Now, monsieur, do you maintain your innocence?" The colonel rose, voice hoarse. "Monsieur Poirot, your recital is flawless but flawed by one omission. You have failed to name the true culprit." His gaze dropped. "I believe I have been a convenient scapegoat." Poirot's eyes lit. "A convenient scapegoat. Yes, and what does that tell us about the playwright of this drama? They needed a hero, a villain, and a chorus. You provided the villainous role. Yet to craft such scenes requires knowledge of every motive, every movement. Only one here possessed that knowledge." He paused, surveying the group. "Who among you had access to the Manor's keys, knowledge of the dagger's location, and familiarity with the secret spring mechanism? Who wrote the letter to be read by me alone, knowing it would command attention?" Lady Belgrave's hand trembled on the arm of her chair. Miss Huntsberry's hand went to her throat. Crane shifted his weight. Sir Rupert swallowed hard. The colonel's shoulders sagged. Poirot raised a gloved finger. "Soon the one will speak or falter, and when they do, the little grey cells shall have their prize." With that, he gestured for us to leave the room. As we filed out, I glanced back to see each suspect's expression. Some defiance, some fear, some calculative calm. The psychological game had begun in earnest, and under Poirot's probing. Each mind had been laid bare, yet still none confessed. In that charged hutch, I realized that only one among them would emerge the victor in this contest of wits and soon. The noose would draw tight round the true murderer's neck. Chapter 8. As secondary mystery's household settled into uneasy silence after Hercule Poirot's psychological inquest. As dusk approached, the grand corridors of Belgrave Manor seemed to close in upon its inhabitants, each footstep a reminder of hidden dangers. Yet no one could have predicted the next twist that would shatter the fragile calm within those panelled walls. Shortly after supper, I accompanied Poirot back to the library to review his notes. The room was dimly lit by shaded lamps, casting quivering pools of light upon the shelves. The box containing the spring mechanism lay on the writing desk, alongside the coroner's report and the folded letter from Mr. Langford. All appeared in order until Poirot's sharp exclamation shattered the stillness. "Mon Dieu! Hastings!" he cried, sweeping aside several sheets. "The letter, the one he commanded to be read only in my presence, has vanished." My pulse quickened. I peered at the vacant space where the envelope had rested. Indeed, it was gone, leaving no trace but a faint indentation on the blotter. The evidence envelope meant to safeguard it stood empty, its seal broken. That letter, Poirot murmured, voice low, contained the victim's final message. Its disappearance is a crime in itself, an attempt to erase the most damning clues. Who among us would dare to steal from Poirot? We summoned Lady Belgrave and the remaining suspects, Miss Huntsberry, Mr. Crane, Sir Rupert, and the butler, Mr. Carter, into the library. Colonel Chamberlain, still smarting from suspicion, lingered at the threshold, but, trembling, refrained from entering. Poirot surveyed each face in turn, his gaze like a surgeon's scalpel. "Msamis," he began, "we have before us not only a murder, but now an act of desperation. Someone has removed the letter, knowing it might expose the true culprit, perhaps more revealing than any will or weapon." He turned to Mr. Carter. "Mr. Carter, you had access to the evidence box. Did you observe anyone near this desk after we left?" The butler bowed his head. "I was ranging the lamp shades when I heard Colonel Chamberlain call for Aiden. The corridor, when I returned, I found the box open and the letter gone. I searched the room immediately, but there was no sign of the envelope. Poirot stroked his moustaches. The Colonel's call convenient, was it not? A diversion to draw you away. Monsieur, Colonel Chamberlain flushed at the accusation. I only thought I heard a cry. Perhaps I was mistaken. An error of the senses is possible, Poirot conceded. But its timing is most fortuitous. He turned to Miss Huntsbury. And you? Miss Huntsbury, did you pass this room on your way to the gardens earlier? She straightened. I walked by. Yes, but I entered no further than the threshold. I wished air to calm my nerves, and yet the door was unlocked. Poirot pressed. Only those with keys or familiarity with the house know how to bypass its tumblers. You hold one such key. Miss Huntsbury bit her lip. I did not enter. I swear it. Poirot allowed the denial to linger before addressing Mr. Crane. Monsieur Crane, you remarked this afternoon upon the value of Mr. Langford's final communication. You remained in the library far longer than necessary when I retrieved the... Well, could you not have pocketed the letter then? Crane's eyes darted. I would never interfere with evidence. I am merely a witness, as you are aware. Witnesses can become actors in their own dramas, Poirot countered. He turned to Sir Rupert. Sir Rupert, your office prepared the stationery. You know precisely how many envelopes were sent and how many should remain. The missing one belonged to your department. Sir Rupert lowered his gaze. I catalogue every item meticulously. If one is missing, someone took it without my knowledge. Poirot raised a hand. Precisely. Someone with access to legal documentation and able to conceal the truth. He paused and surveyed the assembly. The theft indicates desperation and knowledge that the letter held more than mere instructions. It contained, I suspect, the revelation of motive and identity. Lady Belgrave, pale yet resolute, stepped forward. Monsieur Poirot, if the letter is truly gone, surely you have other evidence. He smiled thinly. Madam, evidence is like water in the desert, precious and fleeting. We must act swiftly before the thief vanishes into the night with our only guide. He turned to Mr. Carter. Had the keys been counted? Every guest's key verified. The butler nodded. I will see to it at once. Poirot nodded. Good. Meanwhile, Hastings and I shall examine the likely paths of escape. The corridor outside these doors leads to the servants' wing and to the east staircase. If the thief sought to slip into the grounds, that route may lie open. I fetched my coat and followed him into the corridor. Together, we traced the route to the east staircase narrow, less used stairwell descending to the kitchen wing. The door at its foot was locked, but the heavy lock showed fresh marks, as though picked hastily. Aha, Poirot whispered, evidence of hurried passage. The thief knew both the library's location and how to avoid detection by staff. We retraced our steps and ascended to the main floor. Poirot contemplated the suspects. Who among them has both motive and the knowledge to navigate these hidden passages? The butler knows them. Of course, but would he risk open theft? He serves too faithfully. I suggested, perhaps Sir Rupert, accustomed to moving legal documents. Poirot shook his head. He would not risk his standing for a single letter. No, the thief desires to shield deeper secrets, possessions of personal rather than professional nature. We re-entered the library to find Lady Belgrave standing near the mantel, face composed yet strained. Monsieur Poirot, she said quietly, I found this upon my writing desk. She extended a small scrap of paper, creased and torn, bearing a single word in Mr. Langford's handwriting. Truth. Poirot took the scrap and read it. His eyes gleamed. A final message, hastily torn from the letter. The word truth signifies the essence of his revelation. Our thief left this fragment deliberately a taunt, or perhaps an act of conscience. He turned to all assembled. Zamis. We now confront two linked mysteries, the murder and the theft of its most vital clue, the one who stole the letter, fears its contents more than exposure. They have acted in cowardice, but also in panic. They believe that if the letter is destroyed, the trail will end. Porritt paused, letting the silence settle. But they underestimate the power of that single word, truth. It cannot be erased so easily. And tonight, we shall force the thief to confront it. He signaled for the lights to be dimmed, then motioned for the servants to bar the doors. No one leaves this house until the letter is found or its owner reveals the truth. As the household staff obeyed, I realized the shifting alliances and hidden passages within Belgrave Manor now mirrored the labyrinthine plot that had ensnared Gerald Langford's fate. A secondary mystery had risen, a theft that echoed the original. Crime's cunning, and under Porritt's watchful eye, the true culprit would find that no deception, however elaborate, could withstand the relentless pursuit of the little grey cells. Chapter 9. Hidden connections late into the evening, when the storm finally broke and rain pattered against the leaded windows. Hercule Poirot gathered us again in the library. The atmosphere was taut with anticipation. The household staff had sealed every egress, and a single shard of paper reading truth lay under glass on the writing desk. The sole remnant of Mr. Langford's missing letter. Yet in that one word, Poirot saw the key to every enigma. He rose from his chair, cane in hand, and surveyed the remaining guests. Lady Beatrice Belgrave seated by the fireplace. Miss Eloise Huntsberry poised at a distant table. Mr. Edward Crane beside the sideboard, Sir Rupert Fairchild near the door, and Colonel Chamberlain standing quietly by the hearth. The storm's flashes illuminated their faces in brief. Stark relief, each expression betraying secrets. Monsieur Poirot. Lady Belgrave began, voice soft yet urgent. With the letter gone, must we rely only on inference and conjecture? Madam, Poirot replied, it is precisely in the absence of a direct confession that connections hidden until now must reveal themselves in the labyrinth of relationships at Belgrave Manor. Every link carries weight, he tapped. The shard of paper. Let this word guide us, for truth often dwells between the lines of actions and alliances. He turned to Sir Rupert. Sir Rupert, you prepared the original will and the codicil. You dealt with Mr. Langford's finances and his most private affairs, yet you did not know of the armchair mechanism or the sedative in the sherry. Who then brought these elements together? Sir Rupert swallowed. I was privy to legal matters. Only, I had no reason to tamper with furniture or wine. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, but one among you bridges both worlds, legal and personal, public and private. Someone whose social graces mask a deeper familiarity with each suspect's vulnerabilities. He moved to Miss Huntsberry. Miss Huntsberry, you knew of your brother's debts and your cousin's plans. You feared the loss of your family's future. Yet you did not write the letter, nor do I believe you fitted the dagger handle to the mechanism. Still, your desperation created an alliance. You found a confidant in one of these men. She shook her head. I confess only to worried words. No man here promised me aid in vengeance. Poirot's eyes sparkled, but something else you did share. The confidant's identity with Colonel Chamberlain. You mentioned him first, yet you did not accuse him outright. You trusted him more than I previously realized. Colonel Chamberlain's face darkened. I never pledged to harm Gerald. I only offered support to Eloise in her troubles. Support, Poirot repeated. And yet the colonel claimed he left the manor for a time last evening to compose his thoughts only. To return with a key and a plan. He spoke of Lady Belgrave's portrait in the garden, but he omitted mention of his own family's stakes. The colonel's eyes flickered. My inheritance is modest compared to the Belgrave estate. Poirot stepped closer. You saw an opportunity to bind your fortunes to protect Eloise's future and yours, but you needed someone to confirm your alliance. He turned to Mr. Crane. Monsieur Crane. You financed ventures and accepted Mr. Langford's aid. You felt indebted and yet you did not reveal your true feelings. You withheld the full extent of your financial ruin. Why, Crane's jaw tightened. I wished to maintain my reputation. A public failure would ruin me, precisely. Poirot said, pride is a powerful motive, and it leads to alliances. You sought a partner in crime, someone equally desperate. He paused. Letting the suggestion hang, Crane's lip quivered. But he remained silent. Poirot then regarded Sir Rupert again, and you, sir, advised both Colonel Chamberlain and Miss Huntsberry on legal remedies. You stood as facilitator, knowing each secret, the debts, the inheritance, the potential will. You advised them individually. But whom did you counsel in concert? Sir Rupert's composure cracked. His hands trembled. I acted on instructions. Only. I cannot betray my clients. But you are betraying them now. Poirot said softly, for truth demands revelation. Lady Belgrave rose unsteadily. Monsieur Poirot, please, we are all under unbearable stress. She glanced at Chamberlain, then at Eloise. We have hidden connections, yes, but none deadly. Poirot shook his head. Connections, that is the heart of the matter. A triangle of mutual needs formed here. Eloise needed funds, Colonel Chamberlain needed influence, and Mr. Crane needed secrecy. So Rupert provided the parchment. And I suspect someone provided the mechanism. He tapped his cane on the floor. Only one person had the technical skill to fashion the spring in the armchair, and the anatomical precision to deliver a blow with a dagger handle. That person is not a soldier, nor a financier, nor a lady of society. It is the butler, Mr. Carter. The collective intake of breath echoed against the panelled walls. The staff had shrunk back. But Mr. Carter himself stood with dignity unbroken. Poirot's gaze did not waver. Your duties grant you entrance to every room, knowledge of all comings and goings, and the skill to move unseen. You overheard conversations in kitchens and corridors. You handled cutlery and mechanisms routinely. You prepared the spring. You laced the sherry, and you removed the letter once you realized it threatened exposure. Mr. Carter's shoulders sagged. He stepped forward. Monsieur Poirot, I served this household loyally. I would never harm Mr. Langford. His voice trembled. But the truth is, I admired his fairness. When Lady Belgrave confided in me about her fear of scandal, I promised to protect her. I did not mean to kill, only to scare. Miss Huntsberry gasped. You frightened him. You killed him. Carter bowed his head. I arranged the spring mechanism to tap the chair. To frighten him into renouncing his will changes, I believed. The laudanum would only render him drowsy. When he collapsed, I panicked. I hid the letter to spare Lady Belgrave further disgrace, in my clumsy fear. I set the stage for a suspicion upon Colonel Chamberlain. Silence followed. Sir Rupert paled. Colonel Chamberlain closed his eyes. Mr. Crane looked away. Lady Belgrave stifled a sob. Eloise covered her mouth. Poirot stepped forward. You see, Zemus, how in connections roles have sown and mistaken twist loyalty into betrayal. Mr. Carter believed he served the household best by preserving its reputation. But he forgot the elemental truth. No secret stays buried. When one little grey cell remains awake, he held out the shard, and so, though the letter is gone, one fragment remained. Truth, that fragment guided us to the heart of the matter and revealed the bond between Mr. Carter's devotion and his fatal actions. Mr. Carter sank to a chair. I am sorry to have destroyed a life I respected, and sorry, too, have woven such misery for you all. Lady Belgrave rushed to his side. Your loyalty did this, but your remorse redeems you somewhat. Poirot placed a steady hand on Carter's shoulder. remorse. While admirable, cannot undo the deed. Yet in confession lies relief. He turned to the assembled. Mzamas, the connections that seemed hidden are now laid plain. We have unmasked the author of both murder and misdirection. Let justice follow accordingly. As thunder rumbled overhead, the storm outside mirrored the storm within the library. Now calmed by revelation, in the wake of hidden connections brought to light, each heart felt the weight lift, yet none could forget the tragedy that had torn their lives apart. The little grey cells had triumphed once more, and the truth, as always, had its day. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret collate that night. After the household had retired and the manor lay near total darkness, Hercule Poirot and I returned once more to the library. The storm had subsided, leaving the air crisp and the hearth cold. A lithe wavering lamplight illuminated the evidence laid upon the writing desk, the shattered spring mechanism, the decanter stopper, the shard-marked truth, and Mr. Carter's crumpled confession. Poirot stood before the desk, eyes fixed on the single scrap of paper. He picked it up, turning it over between thumb and forefinger. "Mon ami," he said at last, "we have what appears to be closure. Mr. Carter's admission explains the mechanism, the laudanum, even the theft of the letter, and yet something troubles me." I leaned forward. "You doubt his confession?" He shook his head slowly. "Not doubt, but curiosity. Observe this edge." He indicated the torn margin of the paper. The rip is uneven, as though made by someone with great emotion. Yet the paper's fibers on this side. He held the scrap to the lamplight, stained not merely by ink, but by a faint trace of cigar ash. I frowned. But the only cigar ash we found was of St. Claude No. 5 Mr. Crane's brand. Mr. Carter would not carry cigar ash on his person. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Exactly. If Carter tore the letter to hide it, he would not smear it with another's ash. This suggests he did not remove the letter from the beginning. Rather, someone who smokes St. Claude tore it, perhaps to protect themselves, then handed it off to Carter to conceal. My mind raced. "You mean Mr. Crane?" Poirot tapped a finger against his lips. "Perhaps, but let us not leap so quickly. There is more." He lifted a small glass vial from the desk, remaining trace of laudanum. "Note the residue here. The sedative in the decanter was but a fraction of the dosage required to induce for stupor. Mr. Carter believed he had rendered the victim drowsy, yet the coroner's report noted only mild sedation. I remembered the report, so Langford was not fully under when he collapsed. He could have fought, or called for help. Precisely, Poirot said. Yet there were no cries from the library, only the tapping. The victim must have been struck quickly. The blunt instrument matched the dagger handle from Lady Belgrave's collection. Carter did not know that handle's precise curvature. That knowledge came from someone intimately familiar with the living room's layout. He set the vial down and produced a single glove from Carter's coat pocket, the same glove in which Carter confessed he carried the scrap. Poirot laid it beside the shard. Notice the glove bears no trace of laudanum, no ash on the fingertips. But inside the wrist lies a fine powder matchstick sulphur from a fireplace taper. He tapped the glove. Carter did not light the library candles. He removed sulphur from the sideboard's taper box. Yet this sulphur is of a type found only near the butler's pantry hearth, I said. Meaning he passed through the pantry, after handling the taper box just before the letter vanished, or someone led him there. Poirot replied, let us consider the sequence. The letter is torn by a hand stained with ash, then concealed by Carter at the behest of another. The sedative is insufficient alone to calm the victim. The blow was deliberate, and the dagger hand alone is someone who observed its placement in the study could have taken it to the library. He paused and turned to me. Hastings, who among our suspects smokes St. Claude, visits the butler's pantry. and knows the study's layout. I thought back to our interviews. Mr. Crane smokes it. Yes, and he admitted to visiting the library after dinner. But he claimed to have fetched books. He did not mention the pantry. And so, Rupert, he dines near the pantry entrance, though he does not smoke. Miss Huntsberry and Colonel Chamberlain do not smoke that brand. Lady Belgrave may smell of perfumed gloves, but not of smoke. Poirot nodded. Monsieur Crane, then, had both motive and means. Yet why involve Carter? Perhaps to mislead us further, to hide his own hand by using a loyal servant. He arranged the evidence, scrap, glove, vial, spring mechanism. This is my secret clue, the mingling of Carter's timid confession with Crane's more subtle fingerprints. Carter acted as accessory, deleting the letter and setting the mechanism, yet the original murder belongs to Crane, who possessed the dagger, smoked in the library, and stood to lose everything if Langford amended his will. I exhaled slowly. A devastating combination of opportunity and cunning. Poirot smiled faintly, smoothing his mustaches. Yes, Hastings, Mr. Crane's ego demanded recognition. He believed himself capable of engineering the perfect crime. He enlisted Carter's help unconsciously, confident that suspicion would fall upon the soldier and the solicitor. But he overlooked the smallest details, the ash on the paper, the insufficient sedative, the sulphur on the glove. He closed his eyes briefly, as though savoring the moment. Then he opened them and looked toward the door. We have what we need in the morning. We shall confront Monsieur Crane with this evidence, and he will have no recourse but confession. He slipped the scrap and glove into separate evidence pockets. Come, Hastings, let us rest. Tomorrow, justice will be served, as we left the library. The quiet corridors of Belgrave Manor seemed suffused with relief. The secret clue would bring the true culprit to light. And though the night had been long, the little grey cells had triumphed once more. Chapter 11. Tensions rose the following morning. Belgrave Manor awoke under a pale sun that did little to dispel the weight of suspicion lingering. In its corridors, news had spread among the guests that Hercule Poirot wished to reconvene in the drawing-room at once. As I joined him by the mantel, his expression as inscrutable as ever, he handed me the steaming cups of coffee. Neither of us spoke. Instead, we shared a glance that spoke of the long hours spent unraveling a web of deception. One by one, the suspects arrived. Lady Belgrave glided in first, her composure more brittle now than the fragile porcelain teacup she cradled. Colonel Chamberlain followed, saluting Poirot with stiff shoulders and bloodshot eyes, as though the presence of other gentlemen reminded him of fresh humiliation. Miss Huntsberry entered next, pausing to smooth her gown and whisper a curt good morning, her voice trembling with barely concealed relief. Sir Rupert Fairchild appeared behind her, meticulously adjusting his cuffs and glancing at the door as though expecting someone else. Finally, Mr. Edward Crane strolled in last, his usual air of confident charm replaced by a tight-lipped smile. Poirot rose, placing his cup on a side table. "Samus," he began gently, "we stand at a juncture where emotion can sway judgment more swiftly than fact. It is natural to feel anxious, even fearful, in the face of accusation. Yet we must guard ourselves against the poison of hasty conclusions." He cast a cool glance toward Colonel Chamberlain. "I trust you have slept well, Colonel." The colonel ground out. "Little sleep for many of us, monsieur." His throat worked as he forced a swallow. "But I remain resolute." Poirot nodded and turned to Miss Huntsberry. "And you, mademoiselle, have you found rest?" She rocked on her heels, glancing at the embroidered carpet. "I barely slept. I kept recalling the moment I saw Gerald's body." She swallowed. "I cannot escape that image." A murmur of sympathy rippled, but it was cut short as Sir Rupert cleared his throat. "Madam, Colonel, Miss Huntsberry, is this to become a seance of regrets? I propose we focus on evidence rather than the past. Crane's eyes flickered. Sir Rupert is right. We should speak of facts, not feelings. Poirot raised a finger to forestall further bickering. Precisely so. Let us invoke fact. He produced his notebook and tapped it open. I shall recount an itinerary for each of you from last night. Listen carefully, and correct any errors. He began with Lady Belgrave. You retired to your suite at 10:15. Then rose at 5 to dress. You left your rooms at 6:30 to join breakfast. She dipped her head. That is correct. Turning to Colonel Chamberlain, Poirot continued, you claimed to wander the rose garden until midnight, return through the east corridor, and rest until 6. The Colonel's lip curled. Yes. Though the hour in the garden was closer to 11:30. 11:30, Poirot repeated, marking his notes. Noted. Miss Huntsberry, you said you read until 2 in the guest lounge. Did you exit only when the lights went out? She glanced at the floor. I read until 1:40, then dozed in my chair. Poirot nodded crisply. Sir Rupert Fairchild, your statement was that you worked on the codicil drafts in the office until midnight and then joined the Colonel for brandy. Sir Rupert stiffened. I did indeed. We spoke until the small hours. Crane folded his arms, and I, Poirot, held up a hand. Monsieur Crane, you said you retired at 10, then rose at 3 to retrieve notes in the library. Is that correct? Crane's smile tightened. Indeed. I feared I had overlooked a detail for our inquiries. Poirot closed his notebook and raised his eyes to each face. Observe how even the most careful verbiage can betray uncertainty when pressure escalates. He paused, letting his words sink in. Now, I invite each of you to voice any concerns you have about the statements of others, perhaps something that does not align with your observation. A hush fell as eyes darted from one face to another. Colonel Chamberlain broke the silence. Sir Rupert, you said you joined me for brandy. Yet the butler recalled delivering drinks to the office at that hour. A third drink was delivered to the library. Would that not have been for you, Monsieur Crane? Crane's fingers tightened on the back of his chair. I never requested brandy in the office. I asked only for a coffee in the drawing-room, sir. Rupert's brow furrowed. The servant's memory is fallible. I am certain I offered you brandy, Colonel, and you declined. Sick, Mr. Crane. Please correct the butler if you will. Crane's dark gaze slid to Poirot. My apologies, Colonel. I remember now, it was coffee indeed. He turned to Poirot. Could that explain the residue of laudanum I detected in my cup this morning? Gasps echoed as all eyes shifted to Crane. Lady Belgrave clutched at her pearls. Poison in your coffee, she whispered. Crane shrugged, though his face blanched. I must have mistaken the taste. Coffee can play tricks at odd hours, Poirot smiled. Thinly, indeed, yet food and drink are common vehicles for both truth and treachery. He turned to Sir Rupert. And you, so did you observe Crane in the drawing-room at 3? Sir Rupert hesitated. I thought him here when I returned. Yes, he cleared his throat. But at that hour, I may have been mistaken. Mistaken? Poirot repeated. Very well. He turned to Miss Huntsberry. Miss Huntsberry, you said you dozed at 1:40. Did you hear any footsteps or voices thereafter? She shivered. I recall hearing a muffled thump like a heavy book drop, then silence. That would coincide with Colonel Chamberlain's return. Poirot murmured, glancing at the Colonel, whose face had gone taut. But thank you. The room crackled with accusation and doubt. Poirot pressed his lips together, surveying the frayed nerves and shaken loyalties before him. He cleared his throat. You see how quickly alliances shift when uncertainty reigns. Yet we are bound by one unifying purpose, the pursuit of truth. Colonel Chamberlain rose abruptly. I regret to say I can no longer remain. I prefer the fresh air. He swept past Poirot and out the door. Miss Huntsbury hesitated, then followed. Sir Rupert bowed stiffly and departed. Only Crane and Lady Belgrave remained. Crane took a step toward the windows, gazing out onto the rain-drenched lawns. Lady Belgrave clasped her hands tightly. Poirot addressed Crane in measured tones. Monsieur Crane, you now stand alone in your assertions. You confessed this morning to fetching notes in the library at 3 at your earlier denied presence in the office at midnight. Which timeline does your memory serve? Crane's jaw clenched, the veneer of composure cracking. My memory is fluid, Monsieur Poirot. I have been under great stress. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Stress can fracture even the most steadfast mind. But I would ask you now, is there any aspect of your account you wish to correct before we proceed? Crane swallowed, eyes flickering with fear. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then took a deep breath. I stayed in the library until near dawn, reviewing Gerald Langford's correspondence. I did not sleep. Poirot inclined his head. Thank you, Monsieur, that is important. He turned to Lady Belgrave. Madame, you may join Monsieur Crane here if you wish. Lady Belgrave stepped beside him, voice calm yet firm. I trust Monsieur Poirot's methods, but it pains me to see old friends and trusted confidants start one another so. Poirot bowed. That is the crucible of suspicion, madam. Only in its fires do falsehoods burn away, leaving the tempered steel of truth. He extended his hand. Come, Hastings, there remains one final avenue of inquiry before our next gathering. As we left the drawing-room, I sensed the pressures mounting alliances fraying, nerves unraveling, each suspect poised on the brink of confession or collapse in this crucible. The little grey cells had never steered us wrong, yet the most dangerous twists still lay ahead. Chapter 12. The confrontation be late afternoon. The drawing-room had been transformed into a chamber of reckoning. The heavy shutters were closed. Electric lamps glowing softly against the dusk, servants stood by discreetly at the door, their duty clear. No one was to enter or leave until Monsieur Poirot had spoken his final questioning. At the centre of the room, Poirot reclined in a wingback chair, his little grey cells at full alert. Opposite him, Mr. Edward Crane sat stiffly on a settee, face drawn and pale, while Lady Beatrice Belgrave observed from a side chair, her composure fragile yet firm. Poirot folded his hands and fixed Crane with an inscrutable gaze. Monsieur Crane, you have been most cooperative, yet your statements vary as the tides. You claimed to retire at 10, then to rise at 3, and finally to remain in the library until dawn. Such discrepancies breed doubt. We shall address each in turn. He tapped his cane on the carpet. First, the library at 3 o'clock. You asserted you returned to gather notes, but the butler's log shows no book removed from the shelves after dinner. Pray explain what notes you sought so urgently. Crane swallowed, throat tight. I wished to study Gerald's correspondence. Regarding my debts, I feared an oversight. His voice trembled under Poirot's unwavering stare. In that case, Poirot said, leaning forward, why did you carry neither pen nor paper into the library? Your pockets contained only cigar ash and an empty matchbox. No note-taking implements. Poirot produced the contents of Crane's pockets, a small pile of ash, a silver lighter, and the matchbox. Crane's knuckles whitened as he recognized them. Poirot continued, voice calm yet relentless, and yet you spoke of studying letters. It seems you intended not to study them, but to intercept Gerald's final communique, the letter now missing. You coveted its contents more than your own pride. He allowed the accusation to hang. Crane's eyes flickered. I did not intercept it. I did not. Silence. Poirot said softly. You will answer in due course. He turned to Lady Belgrave. Madam, you were present in the library until 10:30. Watching over Mr. Langford's papers, did you not observe Monsieur Crane's visits thereafter? Lady Belgrave's lip trembled. I left the library at 10. I then paced the corridor until midnight, uncertain. I did not see Mr. Crane again. Poirot's eyes shifted back to Crane. So you slipped past the lady of the house, undetected. A bold move. He paused, measuring Crane's reaction. Crane's jaw clenched. But he remained silent. Now. Poirot said, let us discuss. The mechanism. You are a man of refined tastes. Yet you fashioned a deadly spring beneath the armchair. You knew precisely where to affix the pin for maximum effect. That knowledge could only come from examining each piece of furniture in the study during last night's sojourn. He tapped the small box containing the mechanism, set upon a side table. Crane swallowed hard. I observed it earlier in the evening when retrieving books for study. I noticed a loose seam. His gaze darted away, and yet no seam was. Loose before you entered, Poirot replied. The upholstery laboured against the pin's weight, indicating recent tampering. You planted it there, monsieur. Crane's breath came in shallow gasps. I did not intend to kill him. I only wanted to frighten him, force him to reconsider the codicil. His hands shook, frightened. Poirot repeated, and so you laced the sherry with laudanum just enough to dull, not enough to render unconscious. Then you delivered the blow. But even that plan misfired. The dose was too slight. It required the spring shock to stop his heart. Poirot pointed a slender finger. You miscalculated, underestimated the risk of leaving a fatal injury. Crane's shoulders sagged. He looked at the carpet as though seeking escape in its intricate patterns. Poirot leaned back, folding his cane across his lap. Yet one detail remains unexplained. The missing letter. You knew it held the explanation of motive and account of your desperation and your secret pact with Mr. Carter. You stole it to bury your guilt, but you allowed one word to survive, truth. He gestured to the fragment under glass. You disguised the removal by enlisting Mr. Carter's loyalty. You led him to believe you acted on Lady Belgrave's behalf, when in fact you sought only to protect yourself. But in doing so, you smeared the paper with your cigar ash, the telltale sign of your presence. Crane's eyes filled with tears. He looked up, voice hoarse. I did it all from my reputation for pride. When Gerald insisted on changing his will again, threatening ruin, I felt cornered. I panicked, and you enlisted Mr. Carter. Poirot said gently, a man who would do anything to protect his mistress's reputation. You manipulated his loyalty, then abandoned him when events spun out of your control. Crane bowed his head. Yes, I drove him to it. He lifted his face, eyes glistening. I am sorry for Mr. Carter. I did not mean to ruin him as well as Gerald. Poirot nodded. Remorse is a welcome emotion, monsieur, but it does not absolve you of the crime. You believed yourself above suspicion, too clever for detection. Yet you overlooked the smallest detail, the ash on the paper. He rose slowly and approached Crane, placing a hand on his shoulder. Remember this, pride precedes the fall, and deception leaves its mark in the tiniest grain of evidence. Crane stood and sank to his knees, head bowed. Monsieur Poirot, you have my confession. I will accept my fate. Poirot's expression softened as he nodded to the butler. Mr. Carter, see that Monsieur Crane is attended to, and bring the inspector. As the butler hurried away, Lady Belgrave rose and approached Crane. Gently, she took his hand. I grieve for your loss of hope, she whispered, voice trembling. But perhaps your honesty now can bring some peace. Crane looked up, eyes red. I am willing to face justice, Poirot surveyed the assembled servants who had gathered at the doorway. Msamus, the truth has at last been drawn into light. Yet remember, it was the smallest clue that ash, that torn scrap that shattered the Fawade. No deception, however brilliant, can withstand the little grey cells. With that, Inspector Hamilton entered, notebook in hand. Poirot gestured toward Crane. Inspector, this gentleman is in your charge. As Hamilton moved forward, the tension in Therumi's justice poised to take its course. Outside, the final rays of sun fell across Belgrave Manor, bathing its walls in a farewell glow. Inside, the truth had conquered every layer of intrigue. The confrontation had revealed not only a murder, but the perils of pride and the power of the smallest details. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape the hush that fell upon the drawing-room after Inspector Hamilton's arrival was so profound that one could hear the crackle of the electric lamps. Colonel Chamberlain, Miss Huntsberry, Sir Rupert, and the household staff hovered near the doors, anxious to see justice done. Lady Belgrave offered a tremulous nod of gratitude to Poirot as the inspector approached Edward Crane, placing a firm hand upon his shoulder. Crane drew in a shuddering breath, as if steeling himself to be led away. His eyes, red-rimmed with tears and sleeplessness, met Poirot's steady gaze. For a moment, there was dignity in his posture, a quiet acceptance of fate. Then, with sudden ferocity, Crane wrenched himself free from the inspector's grasp. "Stay back," he shouted, raising a trembling hand. "I will not be paraded like some common criminal." He turned and bolted toward the French windows that opened onto the rose garden. Gasps echoed round the room. Lady Belgrave shrank back, and Colonel Chamberlain sprang forward. Inspector Hamilton barked after him, while Poirot remained seated, observing with calm detachment. Crane flung open the windows and leapt onto the veranda. The downward steps loomed dark and slick from earlier rain. Without hesitation, he dashed down, crashing through a hedge of thorny briars to reach the garden lawn. His coat snagged briefly on a branch, but he tore free and sprinted toward the east wing side gate. I vaulted across the windowsill after him, narrowly avoiding the broken glass. Poirot rose gracefully and followed, his cane tapping a steady rhythm. The night air was cool and fragrant with wet roses. The soft glow of the manor's lamps behind us. Stop, monsieur, I called. But Crane did not hesitate. As he neared the side gate, a narrow wicket that led to the service yard, Inspector Hamilton emerged onto the lawn, lantern in hand. "Halt!" Hamilton cried. But Crane pushed the gate open and darted through the sliver of moonlight beyond. The service yard lay empty, save for stacked crates and the dull gleam of kitchen windows. Poirot and I reached the gate just as he disappeared into the shadows of the servants' staircase. Hamilton drew his revolver, but Poirot gently laid a hand on his arm. "No need for violence, Inspector. He seeks the escape route now where he goes." Hamilton hesitated, lowering the weapon slightly. "I know these passages, thanks to Mr. Carter. They lead to the gardener's cottage and then out to the lane." He turned and gestured. "Come on." We hurried through the gate and descended the narrow stone stair to the servants' wing. The corridor was cold and dimly lit, lined with closed doors and the persistent echo of our footsteps. At its end stood a heavy panelled door leading to the kitchen. Beyond that lay a door to the outside. Hamilton paused. "He must have passed through here." Poirot nodded, raising his lantern to inspect the floor. "Notice, Hastings, the faint scrape of leather against tile here." He pointed to a scuff mark on the flagstones. He slipped, perhaps in haste, tearing his coat. Sure enough, a thread of dark fabric clung to the edge of the step. I stooped to gather the fragment. He's covering every possible route. Hamilton kicked open the kitchen door, and we emerged onto a cobblestoned courtyard lit by a single lantern. The gate to the lane stood ajar. Beyond it, the faint outline of the road stretched into darkness. Crane's panicked footsteps echoed from the far side of the courtyard. After him, Hamilton called. And we gave chase. Crane barreled past, the roasting spit and sacks of potatoes piled high against the wall. He almost reached the lane when Poirot's sharp voice stopped us. Hastings, look. I turned to see a small trapdoor in the cobbles. Slightly raised, the hinges had been recently oiled, and the cover bore scratch marks as though something heavy had been dragged out. Crane dove toward the trapdoor's edge, grasping it with both hands, and yanked it open. Hamilton lunged, but Crane was faster. He leapt into the darkness below, landing with a muffled thud. The trapdoor swung closed behind him. A dull echo that marked his escape into the subterranean passages beneath Belgrave Manor. Hamilton cursed. He's vanished into the old wine-cellar tunnels. Those passages run for yards under the east wing. We must follow. Poirot raised his lantern and peered into the black void. Yes, but he will find only dead ends and locked gates, unless he anticipated them. Follow me, with Hamilton and I at his heels. Poirot descended the rough-hewn stone steps into the dark tunnel. The smell of damp earth and aged wine casks filled the air. Water dripped from the low ceiling, pooling at our feet. Poirot's lantern cast a small circle of light, revealing a single-track path between stacked barrels dotted the first fork. Poirot paused, placing a finger on the wall. He is likely headed toward the old servants' Exeter gate that leads to the lane beyond the gardener's plot. He turned left and we followed. Our footsteps stirred the stillness of the tunnel until, ahead, a faint pained groan answered. Poirot quickened his pace. We emerging into a small chamber beneath the gardener's cottage. A single shaft of moonlight filtered through a barred window above, illuminating Crane as he struggled to rise. He was entangled in vines pushed through a crack in the wall, thorns and branches snagged on his coat and cuffs. His face was drawn in pain, breath ragged. Hamilton rushed forward, gun raised. "Don't move, Crane," the inspector commanded. Crane raised his hands, wincing as his coat tore further. I surrender." He panted. "I didn't intend. I only wanted to overcome them." Poirot's calm figure stepped forward, lantern raised. His expression was neither triumphant nor scornful, but suffused with the quiet authority of the man who knows all. "Vous voyez, Hastings," he said softly, "when pride drives one to extremes, even the cleverest escape can end in entanglement, both figurative and literal." He tapped the lantern on Crane's knee. "And yet you might have stopped here." Crane looked up, tears on his cheeks. I panicked. I thought I could run to France, start anew. Hamilton handcuffed him as Poirot examined the torn coat and the vines. These passages were sealed long ago, Poirot observed. He believed them to be a secret, but knew not that every exit is guarded in time. Crane bit his lip. I nearly killed someone else when I sprang the trapdoor beneath Mr. Carter." Poirot nodded gravely. "Perhaps, but you have been brought to rest by the very mechanism you so carefully crafted a fitting justice." Hamilton tested the gate lock above. "It's sealed. No one else could follow easily." Poirot turned toward us. "Come, Hastings, let us return. The crisis has passed." He raised his lantern again, casting a final beam across Crane's bowed shoulders as we retraced our steps through the tunnels and emerged into the kitchen courtyard. The first light of dawn began to pale the sky. In the silent halls of Belgrave Manor, order was restored. The desperate attempt to escape had failed, and the integrity of justice remained intact under the watchful guidance of Hercule Poirot and his Unerring little grey cells. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place with the first light of dawn filtering through the high windows. Belgrave Manor stirred once more, though its hearts lay heavy with the events of the night. Hercule Poirot and I returned to the library, the scene of so many revelations, to complete the investigation. The library door creaked as we entered, lantern in hand. Upon the desk lay the threaded coat fragment, the battered dagger handle, and the shards of evidence meticulously catalogued. Yet one last mystery remained, the missing portion of Mr. Langford's letter, which held his final, explicative words. Poirot moved to the far corner where the tall oak bookcase stood. With a thoughtful stroke of his moustaches, he studied the rows of leather-bound volumes. Hastings, do you recall Mr. Carter's confession that he only tore one fragment from the letter? He admitted seeing the rest of it, but believed it safer to relinquish it to the darkness. Poirot's eyes gleamed. He told us he concealed the fragment. Yet the bulk of the letter must still lie somewhere. He pressed a fingertip to the bookcases. Framework, assistance from below, no doubt. A lever or latch conceal. Here, a soft click echoed. The section of books swung outward, revealing a narrow recess carved into the wall. Inside lay a folded bundle of papers, yellowed and brittle. I leaned forward. The letter. But how did it end up hidden here? Poirot gently withdrew the bundle. Monsieur Crane's mistake was ordering Carter to remove the letter without specifying destruction. Carter, faithful yet fearful, created this hiding place behind the shelves, intending to recover it once all tranquilly returned. But neither he nor Crane thought to revisit it before flight. He unfolded the letter carefully, smoothing the creases under the flicker of lamplight. Poirot read aloud the final passage penned by Gerald Langford. Mon cher Monsieur Poirot, if this falls into your hands, know that I discovered the truth of Edward Crane's desperation. His debts drove him to forge alliances and threats, which culminated in the chair's deadly surprise. I confront him in the library tonight, but fear he may strike. I entrust you alone with these words, for only you can disentangle this web of pride and remorse. Beware the ash that blinds you to the culprit's hand. Yours in trust, G. Langford. As Poirot finished, he refolded the letter and laid it on the desk alongside the single shard. Marked truth. He turned to me. The final piece falls into place. Hastings, the very letter entrusted to me, reveals the sequence of events and the true motive hidden beneath false clues. Footsteps sounded in the corridor as Lady Belgrave, Colonel Chamberlain, Miss Huntsbury, Sir Rupert, and Mr. Carter entered. Drawn by the promise of resolution, they ranged themselves round the desk. Expressions were yet hopeful. Poirot rose and addressed them. Mzamas, you stand upon the threshold of closure. This letter confirms all we deduced. Monsieur Crane's fear of financial ruin led him to enlist Mr. Carter's loyal assistance. The ash upon the letter, the misjudged dosage of laudanum, the spring mechanism, and the borrowed dagger handle all were Crane's doing. He gestured to the bundle. Here lie the victim's final words, preserved despite the murderer's attempts to obliterate them. He turned to Lady Belgrave. Madam, you see now that your concern for a family honor unwittingly provided the stage for Crane's machinations. You insisted the letter be read only by me, yet did not anticipate its disappearance. She nodded, voice soft. I feared scandal, but I did not foresee tragedy. Poirot then looked to Mr. Carter. And you, brave Mr. Carter, hid the letter, in hope of preserving your mistress's reputation. Your loyalty was admirable, though misapplied. He placed a hand on Carter's shoulder. Your contrition has aided justice in its final hour. Mr. Carter bowed his head. I only wished to protect those I serve. Poirot's gaze settled on Colonel Chamberlain and Miss Huntsbury. You both were ensnared in Crane's plot. Your altered inheritances, your debts, You're a counsel, but none bore culpability. Your hidden connections revealed motives, yet you remained innocent of the crime itself. Colonel Chamberlain offered a stiff nod. Miss Huntsberry's eyes glistened with relief. Finally, Poirot addressed Sir Rupert. You drafted the codicil at Gerald's direction and sought to mediate family discord, though your role as solicitor involved you deeply. You acted in good faith. Your only crime was unwittingly abetting Crane's misdirection. Sir Rupert bowed. I am grateful for your clarity, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot folded the recovered letter and placed it within a fresh envelope. With this, the affair is complete. Inspector Hamilton will see Monsieur Crane's final confession, as corroborated by both the letter and Mr. Carter's testimony. He turned to me, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. Hastings, the little grey cells have once again revealed that the smallest details, a scrap of paper, a speck of ash, a hidden spring can unmask the greatest deception. He swept his cane in a gentle arc. Let us dispatch the inspector. With these documents, the truth, at last, stands fully delivered. As the suspects and staff filed out, Inspector Hamilton entered to receive the final evidence. The stillness of the library seemed to exhale. Its role in human folly played through. Outside, the manor's gardens glowed with morning dew, and the world beyond resumed its ordinary course. Inside, the unyielding logic of Hercule Poirot had conquered deceit once more, and the final piece had fallen precisely into place. Chapter 15. The final gathering be mid-morning. The heavy weight of tension that had gripped Belgrave Manor throughout. The night had coalesced into a single, fateful moment. Lady Beatrice Belgrave issued her summons in the grand hall, her voice steady despite the shadows under her eyes. Monsieur Poirot requests your presence in the drawing-room. All are to assemble. One by one, the surviving guests, Colonel Chamberlain, Miss Huntsberry, Sir Rupert Fairchild, Mr. Carter, and even the sombre household staff filed through the panelled doors. Inspector Hamilton followed at a respectful distance, bearing the final evidence collected from the hidden recess, the drawing-room, once a place of polite conversation, had now been ranged as a stage. Chairs were set in a semicircle before the hearth, each occupant's place marked by a small card bearing their name. At the center stood Hercule Poirot himself, his posture impeccable, cane in hand. The recovered letter and scrap resting upon a leather-bound folio on the polished mahogany table beside him. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, illuminating the rich tapestries and casting a glow that seemed almost reverential. Poirot raised a slender finger, and a hush settled. Mzamas, we have reached the culmination of our inquiry, the final gathering in which truth shall emerge fully from the shadows. His gaze swept the assembled company. You have each borne witness to the evidence, the concealed mechanism in the armchair, the insufficient laudanum in the decanter, the forged codicil, the dagger handle misappropriated from Lady Belgrave's study, the theft and recovery of the letter, and, most crucially, the single shard marked truth. These facts, in isolation, might confuse. Together, they illuminate a single path. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. Colonel Chamberlain's hands, resting on his knees, twitched. Miss Huntsberry's breath came in shallow whispers. Sir Rupert's jaw clenched. Mr. Carter's eyes glistened with contrition. Inspector Hamilton stood alert, pen poised, under Poirot's scrutiny. Every heartbeat seemed thunderous. Let us consider the events, Poirot began, his voice calm, deliberate. At dinner, Mr. Langford consumed but one small glass of sherry. That glass was laced with just a trace of laudanum carefully calculated to dull his senses without overtly incapacitating him. The dosage was insufficient for full sedation, yet enough to steel his vigilance. Shortly thereafter, he excused himself and proceeded to the library. Porritt held up the recovered letter. He carried this envelope, inscribed with no signature, but bearing his seal of trust. He instructed that it be read only in my presence, for it contained his discovery of a dire threat against him. That threat was delivered in smoke and steel and spring and sulphur. He indicated the mechanism's remnants. His spring-loaded pin was concealed in the armchair's upholstery. When Mr. Langford sat, the pin's release provided a jarring, disorienting blow to the head intended to mimic an accident or even a supernatural visitant. He set the letter aside and crossed to the hearth, where a small side table bore the battered dagger handle. That handle one of a matched pair was taken from Lady Belgrave's study. Only one person knew its exact shape and storage, the individual responsible for its removal and its use as the blunt instrument. He let the silence deepen, watching each face. Returning to the table, Porritt produced the small scrap inscribed truth. When the full letter was torn, only this fragment survived. It fell between the pages of a book and later was hidden. Here, he gestured to the secret recess behind the bookcase, until my insistence revealed its hiding place. Notice the ash upon this paper, a brand of Havana cigar favoured by Monsieur Crane. That speck of ash, invisible to the careless eye, betrayed the hand that tore the letter and tainted its margins. A faint gasp rose from Miss Huntsbury. Colonel Chamberlain's fist clenched. Sir Rupert's eyes flicked downward. Porritt watched them, unblinking. Yet mere identification is not enough. We must understand the motive and the sequence of deception. He stepped back and began pacing in MEASURED circles. Monsieur Crane faced ruin. His debts mounted. His ventures faltered. Mr. Langford, his creditor and his rescuer, declared his intention to amend his will again, privatizing his fortune from the ambitious financier. In panic, Mr. Crane conceived a plan to frighten Mr. Langford into abandoning his latest codicil by orchestrating an apparent accident to blow that might terrify without killing. Porritt paused before Mr. Carter. He enlisted Mr. Carter's aid, knowing the butler's devotion to Lady Belgrave and his knowledge of the manor's secret passages. Carter agreed to hide the letter and on the mechanism, believing he served the lady's interests. In doing so, he sealed his own complicity. The butler bowed his head, silent. However, Porritt continued. Crane miscalculated the potency of the laudanum. The dosage dulled only a fraction of pain, requiring the mechanical spring to complete his design. Yet even then, he did not end Mr. Langford's life swiftly. A second blow with the dagger handle was necessary, brutal and decisive. The body was seated, as though still engaged in reading, to mask the foul deed. He walked to the hearth-side table and tapped the handle. Thus, the final piece fell into place when the coroner noted the curvature of the blow matched no ordinary implement, but this specific handle, and, in his haste, Crane left traces ash in the letter, sulphur on Mr. Carter's glove. A torn coat fragment caught in briars during his ill-fated flight. Porritt strode back to the centre of the room. Monsieur Crane believed himself above suspicion, having framed Colonel Chamberlain with the stolen will and Sir Rupert with the codicil's forgery. Yet he overlooked the smallest detail. Truth, as Mr. Langford himself wrote, cannot be banished wholly. He raised his eyes to Crane. Do you see now, monsieur, that no matter how elaborate the design, a single thread pulled from the tapestry can unravel the entire plot? Crane, seated with gaunt features, nodded slowly, tears in his eyes. He rose, voice unsteady. I see, Monsieur Porritt. I confess. I bore the initial betrayal of his trust and conspired with Mr. Carter. I struck him. Twice he bowed his head. I am sorry. A collective exhalation coursed through the room. Colonel Chamberlain leaned back, relief etched on his face. Miss Huntsbury wiped her eyes. Sir Rupert exhaled and sank into his chair. Mr. Carter remained silent, his shoulders trembling. Porritt gave a small nod to Inspector Hamilton, who stepped forward and placed Crane under formal arrest. "Thank you, gentlemen, and you, mesdames," Porritt said, addressing Lady Belgrave and Miss Huntsbury with a slight bow. "The affair is concluded. Justice will take its course." He turned to me, his eyes bright. "Hastings, the curtain has fallen on this drama of pride and deception, the smallest clue the ash upon the letter, the spring's secret. The torn fragment has revealed what even the boldest misdirection could not conceal." As Crane was led away, the assembly dispersed quietly, each reflecting on the tragedy that had unfolded. The drawing room, once again empty, seemed to hold its breath in reverent calm outside. The grounds of Belgrave Manor shimmered in the late sun, the promise of peace restored, though forever mingled with the memory of a crime solved by the unerring power of the little grey cells. Chapter 16. The reveal late that afternoon. The gathered company reconvened in the library for what would be the definitive moment of truth. The air still hummed with the echoes of confession and flight, yet now held a solemn calm. Lady Beatrice Belgrave sat at the head of the cheval-glass, her fine features composed but heavy with the day's weight. Colonel Chamberlain and Miss Huntsbury stood quietly by the hearth, their earlier anxieties replaced by a cautious relief. Sir Rupert Fairchild took his place behind a small side table laden with documents, ready to formalize the findings. Mr. Carter watched from the doorway, humbled but dignified, and Inspector Hamilton lingered by the inner door, prepared to bear away the final statements. At the center, Hercule Poirot stood beneath the grand portrait of Lady Belgrave's late husband. His posture was regal, cane in hand, little grey cells humming with the satisfaction of completion. In his left hand, he held the recovered letter, now fully authenticated and bearing the victim's handwriting. With a measured breath, he addressed the assembly. "Msamas," Porritt began, his voice clear and resonant, "we have laid bare the intricate layers of deception that led to Gerald Langford's untimely demise. You have heard confessions, witnessed flights, and pondered the hidden passages of both this manor and the human heart. It is now time to piece together, in a single account, the full sequence of events as they truly transpired." He set the letter on the desk and tapped it. "Script for emphasis. Mr. Langford, discovering Monsieur Crane's clandestine plea for assistance, penned his final missive to me, trusting that I alone could ensure justice. He bade that it be read in my presence, that the truth might emerge. But Monsieur Crane, driven by desperation, stole the letter, hoping to bury its revelations." Porritt turned to Inspector Hamilton. "Inspector, will you read Monsieur Crane's formal confession, now fully corroborated by the victim's own words?" Inspector Hamilton stepped forward, clearing his throat. "In my presence. Monsieur Edward Crane has admitted to the following. On the evening of April 12th, after dinner, he clandestinely laced his cousin Sherry with a sedative dose of laudanum insufficient to render unconscious, intending only to dull his senses. He then orchestrated the release of a spring mechanism hidden in the library armchair, calibrated to deliver a jarring blow to Mr. Langford's head. When this proved insufficient, he struck Mr. Langford a second time with the handle of a desk dagger. Subsequently, under cover of darkness, he enlisted Mr. Carter to conceal the letter and destroy evidence. Upon discovery of the body, he planted the original will in Colonel Chamberlain's coat pocket and removed incriminating documents to mislead suspicion. The library fell silent, the weight of the formal confession hanging in the air. Porritt inclined his head. "That, Msamas, is the full admission. Yet the culmination of justice requires that we understand motive and consequence in equal measure." He turned to Monsieur Crane, who stood at the back of the room, flanked by 2 constables. Crane's shoulders slumped, his voice hollow as he spoke. I am sorry. I thought I could save myself, but all I did was destroy a life I respected. His eyes found Lady Belgrave's. Forgive me. Lady Belgrave's gaze softened. I forgive you in part, Edward. May you find the strength to atone. Poirot nodded and then addressed the remaining guests. You, Colonel Chamberlain, endured the burn of false accusation yet stood by your honour. You, Miss Huntsbury, faced the possibility of disgrace yet remained true to your principles. You, Sir Rupert, lent your skill as solicitor in good faith. And you, Monsieur Carter, offered your loyalty, misguided though it was, in the service of protecting others. He paused, letting each person meet his gaze. Your revelations, your courage to confess or to endure, have allowed justice to be served. Yet let us not forget the lesson Mr. Langford imparted in his final words. Beware the ash that blinds you to the culprit's hand. So, too, must we guard our own judgments as we move forward. Poirot lifted the letter once more. I shall deliver this to the Crown prosecution, along with the mechanical device and the formal statements. The law will now take its course. For Bertram Langford's soul, for the honour of Belgrave Manor, and for the memory of one who sought only to reveal the truth. As he closed the leather folio, a hush of mutual understanding passed among them. Colonel Chamberlain and Miss Huntsbury exchanged a glance of relief tinged with sorrow. Sir Rupert bowed his head respectfully. Mr. Carter, tears in his eyes, gave a final nod of loyalty to his mistress. Outside, the last rays of daylight faded, replaced by the warm glow of library lamps. Poirot tapped his cane lightly. And now, Samus. The affair of the echoing armchair draws gently to its close. May each of you remember that deception, no matter how artful, leaves its trace, and that the pursuit of truth, guided by the little grey cells, shall ever prevail. With that, Hercule Poirot offered his arm to Lady Belgrave, escorting her from the room as the others followed. The door closed behind them, leaving the library in tranquil hush. On the polished desk, the instruments of justice lay in orderly repose, a testament to the unerring power of deduction and the final reveal of truth in all its stark clarity. Chapter 17. Outcome and justice of morning after the final gathering dawned with a crisp clarity that belied the turmoil of the preceding days. Belgrave Manor, its secrets laid bare, now wore an air of solemn calm. I found myself in the library once more, helping the maid dust off the recovered evidence meticulously, documenting the mechanism for Inspector Hamilton and lending a hand to pack away the last of the coroner's paraphernalia. The room seemed to breathe easier, as though relieved that justice had run its course. News had spread quickly. Monsieur Crane was formally committed to stand trial at the assizes. Mr. Carter had been released under a promise of truthful testimony, and the altered will and codicil were cancelled at Lady Belgrave's request. Colonel Chamberlain and Miss Huntsbury, though shaken, had been exonerated completely. Sir Rupert Fairchild, while reprimanded for his lack of vigilance regarding the codicil's authenticity, retained the respect of his peers for his integrity in court. As I arranged books upon the shelves, Poirot entered, his pince-nez perched upon the bridge of his nose, a thoughtful expression on his face. Mon ami, he said softly, taking in the orderly surroundings. See how balance returns when folly is confronted by reason. He paused by the desk, where the leather folio lay closed. This instrument of evidence has served its purpose. I placed the final manuscript of notes alongside it. Inspector Hamilton will take these to London today, I said, and then our duties here conclude. Poirot finished. Yet justice is more than the handing over of one criminal. It is the preservation of moral order for all. Let us see how our friends fare beyond these walls. We left the library to find Lady Belgrave near the grand window overlooking the rose garden. Her countenance, though marked by fatigue, reflected a steely resolve. Colonel Chamberlain stood beside her, glancing now and then at the distant horizon. "Good morning, madam," Porritt greeted with a respectful bow. Lady Belgrave turned, managing a small smile. "Monsieur Porritt, I wish to thank you. Without your intervention, our family might have been ruined further." She glanced at the garden, dew clinging to petals like tiny jewels. "I shall rest and then range to rebuild the estate's reputation. Your courage has been admirable," Porritt replied. "May this trial bring closure and renewal." Colonel Chamberlain stepped forward. "Monsieur Porritt, on behalf of Miss Huntsbury and myself, I offer our deepest gratitude. Your unerring logic restored both our honor and my faith in justice." Porritt inclined his head. "You are steadfast in adversity, worthy qualities indeed. And now, courage will guide you forward." Miss Huntsbury approached, her violet gown replaced by a morning dress of soft rose hue. Her eyes were bright with and tears of relief. "Thank you, monsieur. I shall use what remains of my inheritance for my family's welfare and to honor Gerald's memory." "A noble endeavor," Porritt said, offering his handkerchief courteously. "May his legacy live in your kindness." We walked through the corridor to the study, where Sir Rupert waited by his desk, pen in hand, drafting letters to the solicitor's registry to reverse the codicil. He looked up with a sigh of satisfaction. "Monsieur Porritt," he said, offering a formal nod, "your assistance has cleared my name and corrected the legal records. I shall redouble my efforts to ensure such oversights never occur again. Your conscientiousness is commendable." Porritt replied, "The law demands both precision and integrity. You possess both." At the doorway, Mr. Carter paused, broom in hand. The butler's appearance was steadier now, though his eyes held traces of lingering regret. "Sir," Carter said softly, addressing Porritt, "I remain in Lady Belgrave's service. With her permission, I shall continue my duties, remembering always that loyalty must never eclipse morality." "Wise words, Mr. Carter," Porritt responded, patting his shoulder. "Your honesty, too late though, it came, ensured the true murderer was found. That is a debt well repaid by conscience." As we ventured into the courtyard, Inspector Hamilton approached, topped by his broad-brimmed hat, documents clutched in hand. "Monsieur Porritt," he said gravely, "the assizes convene next week. I shall present the evidence, the letter, the mechanism, Crane's confession sealed with the victim's own final words." Porritt nodded. "Thank you, Inspector. May the jury see clearly." As we have, the inspector tipped his hat and moved on. His duty clear, I noticed Porritt's gaze linger on the distant horizon as if contemplating the larger canvas of human nature. "Mon ami," I ventured, "do you ever tire of these cases?" Porritt offered a gentle smile. "Tire? No. Each is a window into the puzzling heart of mankind, and each reminds us that, even in an age of uncertainty, the light of truth can be kindled by the little grey cells." We retraced our steps toward the manor's main entrance. Beneath the portico, carriage wheels waited to convey us to the station. Lady Belgrave and Colonel Chamberlain stood by the steps. Bidding a quiet farewell, Miss Huntsbury waved from the garden gate. Sir Rupert doffed his hat, and Mr. Carter remained at the door, a figure of steadfast courtesy. Porritt turned to me, gloved hands clasped behind his back. "Hastings, let us depart. Leaving Belgrave Manor to heal and to remember." He paused, eyes softening. "May those within find comfort in truth, and may justice, though often slow, act with unwavering purpose." I nodded, heart-warmed by the peaceful scene, as we climbed into the carriage. Porritt looked back at the manor's facade, now bathed in gentle morning light, for a final moment. He allowed himself a rare expression of contentment. Adieu, Mzamas, he murmured, and may each of you find peace in the days to come. The carriage rolled away, wheels echoing on the gravel drive, carrying us toward the station and toward the next mystery that awaited the unerring powers of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 18. The closing remark. A gentle hush fell upon the assembly as Hercule Poirot rose from his seat by the hearth, the final embers of the fire flickering low. The tragic drama that had unfolded within Belgrave Manor's walls was now complete, its threads woven into a single tapestry of deceit and justice. Each individual present Lady Beatrice Belgrave, Colonel Arthur Chamberlain, Miss Eloise Huntsberry, Sir Rupert Fairchild, and Mr. Carter waited in respectful silence, their eyes fixed upon the great Belgian detective whose little grey cells had guided them through darkness. Poirot swept his gaze across the room, pausing on each face in turn. "Mzamas," he began, voice warm yet formal, "we stand at the terminus of a journey through fear, suspicion, and grief, leading at last to truth. You have witnessed suffering and confession, flight and downfall. Now, let us reflect upon what remains." He stepped forward, cane tapping softly against the polished floor. "First, to you, Lady Beatrice, whose courage under duress exemplified grace. Though you sought only to shield your family from scandal, you demonstrated the nobility of heart that guided you to summon justice rather than conceal it. May the restoration of your estate be guided by compassion and wisdom." Lady Belgrave inclined her head, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Your counsel has been a beacon." Poirot's mustaches twitched in acknowledgement. He turned to Colonel Chamberlain, "And you, Colonel, who endured wrongful suspicion yet retained your honor. Your steadfast demeanor under unfounded accusation reaffirmed that integrity is its own shield. I trust that life's next chapter holds kinder fortune for you." The colonel offered a modest salute, lips pressed in a firm line. "Your faith in me restored my own confidence, sir." Poirot nodded and addressed Miss Huntsberry. "Mademoiselle, you exhibited the courage to face your family's trials and to speak truth, even when it posed risk. May your brother's affairs find repair, and may your heart be eased by your fortitude." Miss Huntsberry's cheeks warmed as she inclined her head. "I am in your debt, Monsieur Poirot." "Sir Rupert," Poirot continued, turning to the lawyer, "you acted with earnest conscientiousness, though unwittingly drawn into the web of deceit. Your commitment to amend those errors speaks to your dedication to justice. May your practice flourish in honor." Sir Rupert bowed. "I shall carry this lesson always." "Yes, sir." Finally, Poirot regarded Mr. Carter. "And you, Mr. Carter, whose loyalty led you astray yet whose ensuing confession aided justice's course. You taught a path between service and morality. May your future service shine with both devotion and integrity." The butler's eyes glistened. He gave a respectful bow. "I shall endeavor to deserve such guidance, monsieur." Poirot lifted his cane. "The affair of the echoing armchair is concluded. Yet its echoes remain. These walls will forever remember the tapping that heralded a fall, the stolen letter that demanded revelation, and the confrontation that delivered justice. But let the final memory be that of unity renewed, of friends and family emerging from the crucible, of deceit stronger and more compassionate." He paused and allowed a gentle smile to form. "And now, Mzamas, for the final reveal, my customary closing remark." He cleared his throat, adopting a lighter tone. "It is a strange thing that the smallest spark can ash fleck upon paper. The scrap inscribed truth, the clinching click of a hidden spring can ignite the brightest flame of discovery. In this, we learn that no secret, no matter how carefully concealed, can endure the illumination cast by steadfast reason and relentless curiosity." A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Poirot nodded appreciatively. then lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "And let us remember, above all, that il faut toujours viser la lune, carmem and castechek, on a terret dans les étoiles. We must always aim for the moon, for if we miss, we land among the stars." He tapped the air with his cane in farewell. "With that, I bid you adieu. May your lives be guided by truth, and may your little grey cells serve you ever so diligently." With those final words, Hercule Poirot raised his hat in graceful salute and departed the library, leaving behind a gathering forever changed by his unerring deductions and indomitable spirit. Outside, the soft rustle of spring's first breeze seemed to whisper of new beginnings and of mysteries yet to be solved by the smallest details and the keenest minds.